Chapter 652. The golden thread was very thin and tough. There was only one way to bury it in a person's body, and that was to sew it in with a needle. The process must be very painful. Who would torture themselves like this if they had no other choice? Ning Ke looked at Yi Hongyu and said, "It seems that the West Hill Divine Palace has accepted Long Qing again." Yi Hongyu said, "What does this have to do with Long Qing?" Ning Ke said, "Only Long Qing knows that I know Taotai. That's why you buried the money in your body." "Long Qing knows that you know Taotai?" "He didn't tell the Divine Hall." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said, "I told you that burying the money was something I did after I returned from the wilderness a few years ago." Ning Ke was a little surprised and said, "Lotus was already dead then. Why did you endure so much pain and bury the money in your body?" Yi Hongyu said, "Because I was always ready for someone to eat me." Ning Ke was silent for a long time and then said, "You're really crazy." He moved back a little to make sure that the blood on his chest had coagulated. He loosened his palm and held the hilt again. Yi Hongyu used mud to cover the wound on her shoulder and neck and then calmly raised her head. Their gazes met again in the dark swamp, and they both understood the meaning in each other's eyes. No matter how valiant and fearless a warrior was, after being so close to death like the two of them, they would definitely be immersed in intense fear and longing for life. Instinctively, they would have the thought of avoiding each other and avoiding death. At the very least, they would need to rest for a long time before they could muster up the courage to fight again. But Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu were not like that. He knew that Yi Hongyu would not let them leave alive, and Yi Hongyu knew that he would not give up easily. Therefore, a bloody and intense battle was about to begin. Yi Hongyu suddenly looked in front of her. Her bare feet stepped into the muddy water. Her white, jade-like toes were painted red. At this moment, they were soaked in the muddy water and had turned white. At this moment, the muddy water was trembling and continuously washing her red nails. She was stepping on a patch of slippery moss. The moss was also trembling and rubbing against her palms. It felt a little itchy and numb, as if someone was gently scratching it with a feather. Ning Ke also felt the slight vibration of the earth, and felt a little confused. He looked to the west of the swamp, which was still shrouded in mist. It was a vast expanse of whiteness and nothing could be seen. The shaking of the earth gradually intensified, and the shallow water in the swamp began to ripple. Then it began to dance. The muddy water was like a dancer in gray, constantly jumping up and down. Under the moss on the surface of the swamp, an arch suddenly appeared. It extended from the edge of the mist in the west all the way to the front of them. A black shadow scuttled around, and it turned out to be a smooth capybara. Then, dozens or even more arches appeared under the mossy plain. Countless capybaras clung tightly to the swamp ground, fleeing in horror towards the east, as if there was something extremely terrifying behind them. However, the strange thing was that not a single capybara tried to drill into the depths of the swamp. Anything in large numbers would look very scary, not to mention a group of extremely ugly fellows covered in greasy hair and mud. It was even more hair-raising. Although Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu were not afraid of these poisonous capybaras, they subconsciously took a few steps back and made way for them. The surface of the swamp shook more and more violently. The moss kept rolling and the muddy water kept jumping. The muddy water was like rainwater on a drum, and there was no time for it to rest. When hundreds of capybaras passed through in horror, more beasts rushed out of the mist in the west and fled towards the east. The most terrifying scene was the scene of at least tens of thousands of mud rats, squeaking and running away. Ning Ke even saw 2 snowfield direwolves among the fleeing beasts. The snowfield direwolves lived in the cold regions of the far north and were the overlords of the cold regions. As the hot sea gradually froze and the desolate men moved south, they followed them. In the past 2 years, they had become the most terrifying beasts in the depths of the wilderness, and their reputation had even spread to the central plains. However, at this moment, the snow-colored fur of the two giant wolves was covered with mud, and there were several extremely terrifying bite marks on their backs. They looked extremely tired and timid, and did not look as terrifying as the rumors had said. The number of fleeing beasts increased, and covered the entire surface of the swamp that was not covered by the mist. Yi Hongyu was the great divine priest of judgment, and Ning Ke was also a powerhouse. However, facing such a large number of fleeing beasts and facing the wrath of nature, they did not dare to act rashly. At the beginning, when hundreds of capybaras appeared, the two of them each took a few steps back, and then they were forced to keep retreating. As a result, the distance between the two of them became wider and wider. At the same time, they looked towards the swamp that was covered by the mist in the west, and their expressions gradually became solemn. They silently thought about how could there be so many beasts in the swamp, and what could scare so many beasts into forming a group and fleeing. What kind of danger was hidden in the thick mist? Could it be a legendary ancient wild beast? The earth shook, and the sound of hooves was like thunder. The mist in the west of the swamp suddenly became chaotic, and a gray shadow leaped out of the mist and landed heavily on the ground, splashing mud under its hooves. To Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu's surprise, what leaped out of the mist was not an ancient wild beast, nor was it a senior cultivator who lived in seclusion in the swamp. Instead, it was a gray horse. The gray horse was agile and unusually handsome. Its long mane danced around its neck, and it ran on the soft, muddy surface of the swamp like a gray shadow. It was obviously a wild horse. However, no matter how handsome a wild horse was, it was impossible for it to scare hundreds of capybaras, tens of thousands of mud rats, and so many other beasts into fleeing in panic. At this moment, a white figure leaped out of the fog. It was a white mare that was just as majestic. Then dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of wild horses rushed out of the fog. The sound of hooves was like thunder. Under the trampling of countless horse hooves, the entire swamp seemed to be shaking. The horses neighed like roars, and the moss on the ground seemed to be blown away by a strong wind, not daring to rise. The horses were as dense as the sand in the wilderness. In an instant, the fog in the west was broken into strands, and even the thick fog was rolled up and rushed over. The Tang Empire was rich in cavalry. However, Ning Ke had never seen so many horses in his life, and Yi Hongyu had never seen them either. Such a powerful rush of horses frightened them, and they finally understood why the beasts had fled so miserably. They hurriedly retreated and made way for the horses. Ning Ke retreated, turned around, and ran back desperately. He jumped into the pool and quickly ran to the shore. He helped Sang Sang into the horse carriage, and then slapped the big black horse, who was in an extremely confused state, to wake it up. He urged it to drag the carriage, and fled to the east with the wild horses. This was a great opportunity to leave. How could he miss it? The wild horses passed through the swamp violently, and the fog rolled and the earth was restless. Yi Hongyu found a withered tree by the swamp and stood on the branch, looking at the flashing shadows of horses in the fog in front of her. The fog was brought here by the wild horses, and her vision was blocked. She could only see an area in front of the tree. All kinds of wild horses ran at a high speed in front of her without any interruption, and the horses neighed continuously in the fog. Yi Hongyu's face was a little pale. There were more than thousands of wild horses. Even if all the cavalries in the world were added up, they would not be as many as this wild horse herd. How did so many wild horses survive in the swamp? Where did they find food? Why could they gallop in the dangerous swamp without worrying about being swallowed? There were many unexplainable questions. The fog in the swamp was like a layer of coat over the questions, making it impossible for her to touch the truth. Her mood became a little heavy. After a long time, the fog gradually calmed down, and the sound of horses' hooves gradually faded away. In the depths of the fog, there was a messy sound of hooves. It could be a horse that was alone, and there were a few unpleasant caws that sounded like black crows. Yi Hongyu's expression suddenly became serious, and she woke up from the shock. She jumped off the dead tree and rushed towards the pool. However, when she passed through the pool and came to the shore, the black horse carriage had already disappeared. On the ground by the pool there was a dress. Yi Hongyu looked at the dress and did not say anything. She knew that it was left for her by Ning Kei and Sang Sang. The black horse carriage blended into the wild horse herd, rushed into the thick fog, and ran wildly towards the east. The horse neighed outside the carriage, and the dense sound of hooves even made people's ears hurt. Although they had escaped from Yi Hongyu under the cover of the wild horse herd, Ning Kei was still very nervous, or even more nervous. This was because he knew that wild horses were very violent, especially such a large herd of wild horses. They could be kings in the wilderness, and they had previously chased the giant wolves and capybaras into a mess. If the wild horse herd refused to accept the big black horse, and especially refused to accept the horse carriage, then the situation would become very dangerous. Fortunately, after the wild horse herd confirmed that the big black horse was their kind and qualified to travel with them, they did not attack them. Only a dozen wild horses nearby looked at the carriage as they ran, and even a young stallion curiously moved its head to the window, as if it had never seen a horse carriage before. When the wild horse herd appeared, the big black horse was very uneasy, because even it had never seen so many of its kind, especially in a geographical environment like the swamp. Therefore, when it merged with the wild horse herd, it behaved very obediently and kept a low profile. However, when it found that it was still faster than the wild horse herd, confidence and pride returned to its body. It raised its head higher and higher, and snorted louder and louder. When the young stallion tried to poke its head into the window, it neighed with extreme displeasure. The young stallion neighed back with some dissatisfaction. Ning Kei's heart skipped a beat, and he wanted to kick the big black horse away. Fortunately, the young stallion did not do anything other than neighing. The black horse carriage mingled with the wild horse herd and ran toward the east side of the swamp. They ran for a whole day and night, and the horses only rested twice. Ning Kei wanted to leave, but the carriage was surrounded by black horses, and it was impossible to squeeze out. Moreover, he found something strange. The wild horse herd seemed to be able to find the legendary real path when they ran in the swamp, so they did not encounter any danger. Since the wild horse herd was not hostile and could pass through the swamp faster, Ning Kei was certainly willing to go with them. The next morning, the wild horse herd finally ran out of the swamp and came to the wilderness. Under the morning light, green grass gradually grew. The black horse carriage came out of the fog and saw such a beautiful scenery. Ning Kei suddenly felt relaxed. Suddenly, he heard cawing coming from the fog behind him, and thought that these black crows were really haunting him. He angrily scolded, "Shut up!" The cawing still sounded in the fog, and it sounded extremely dissatisfied. Ning Kei looked back. The fog gradually dispersed, and 8 unusually handsome horses came out. These 8 horses pulled a Taoist chariot. On the chariot sat a black donkey. It was not the crows that were cawing, but the donkey. Send the first chapter here, and fight for the next chapter before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 653. The 8 horses were all very handsome. Any one of them was at least as good as the white horse that Chanyu of the Left King's Palace had given to the flower addict years ago. One could imagine how luxurious the sedan must be to have 8 horses pulling it. However, the truth was that the carriage was very shabby. The holes on both sides had been blocked by a few pieces of dead wood, and even if they were successfully repaired, the embroidered cushions on the carriage had long since rotted. No matter how one looked at it, it looked like it had been picked out from a garbage dump. But this was not the point. The point was the donkey on the sedan. The donkey was not big and was completely black except for its mouth. It was lying lazily on the sedan with its 4 hooves pointing to the sky like wooden sticks. There was a basket of yellow fruits on the sedan. The black donkey was chewing one in its mouth. Judging from the crisp sound of juice, it should be rich in juice. In a desolate and uninhabited swamp, there was actually a herd of tens of thousands of wild horses. This was already a very shocking thing, but the one commanding this herd of wild horses was actually a donkey. Furthermore, this donkey was sitting on the chariot like a human, lazily eating fruit. Anyone who saw it would think that it was a monster. Ning Ke knew that the black donkey was not a monster because he was used to seeing such behavior in the back of the mountain of the academy. Whether it was the old yellow bull, the big white goose, or his big black horse, they were all like this. If the black donkey on the sedan was really a monster, then he had lived with monsters for many years. When he first saw the black donkey on the chariot, he had already guessed its origins. In the back of the mountain of the academy, on the top floor of the House of Red Sleeves, at the bottom of Daming Lake, from second brother, Aunt Jian and many others, whenever he heard stories about youngest uncle, he would always hear people mention the little black donkey. He became familiar with it after hearing so many stories. Although he had never seen the little black donkey, it had always occupied a place in his heart. He was not afraid at all. He only could not suppress his excitement. He jumped off the carriage and rushed to the shabby sedan. It was only when Ning Ke came to the front of the chariot that he noticed that the black donkey's fur was not very smooth. Some parts of it had already fallen off, making it look like a bald spot. He could not help but be stunned and then felt sad. Decades ago, youngest uncle rode the little black donkey out of the academy and entered Chang'an. Then, he rode the black donkey to travel the world. He went to the Lank Temple, entered the wilderness, and went to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. The little black donkey witnessed countless legends in the cultivation world. However, decades later, even though the little black donkey was still alive, it was still old. It was no longer a little black donkey but an old black donkey. Several strong wild horses came from the back of the sedan and blocked Ning Ke's view. Ning Ke jumped up and waved at the sedan, shouting, "I'm from the academy! I'm from the academy!" The old black donkey leaned against the back of the chariot and chewed on his fruit with a lazy expression. He didn't care at all. Ning Ke thought that even if the donkey could understand human language, it would not believe that he was from the academy with just a few words. He could not help but feel that he was stupid. With a slight thought, the crystal liquid floating in the depths of his body rotated slowly. The pure Great Spirit slowly poured into his arm and then dissipated into the air along his fingers. A strong and determined aura suddenly appeared beside the shabby sedan. The black donkey continued chewing on his fruit and still ignored Ning Quebec. It thought mockingly that if it had not discovered that Ning Ke was a disciple of the academy, why would it waste so much effort to save him? It could not even understand this, and actually used the Great Spirit to perform like an idiot. How embarrassing! It seemed that the academy was getting worse with each generation. Ning Ke did not understand why the black donkey did not respond, but he understood the mocking expression on its face. He sighed and thought that it was indeed youngest uncle's donkey. It was actually so proud and arrogant. The big black horse stared in the direction of the shabby sedan with its round eyes. It had spent a long time with the old yellow ox in the back of the mountain of the academy. How could it not know about the black donkey? Looking at Ning Ke's expression, it guessed that this was the black donkey. It could not help but feel shocked and uneasy. After thinking about it for a long time, it finally plucked up its courage and walked over. The 8 extraordinarily handsome wild horses saw the way it walked over with its head lowered and felt that it was too sneaky. They neighed solemnly and issued a stern warning. The big black horse was so frightened by the stern neigh that its front legs turned to jelly and it almost knelt down. The black donkey did not want to pay attention to Ning Ke, but it was obviously interested in the big black horse. It cawed twice and gestured to the 8 horses that it was its nephew and asked it to come over. The big black horse moved with great difficulty to the front of the sedan with trembling legs. It was extremely humble and careful as it stuck its head into the sedan and gently rubbed the black donkey's round belly. It stuck out its tongue and licked it. In the back of the mountain of the academy, it had been bullied by the big white goose named Wooden Fish. It thought that the white goose was only a senior brother, and the donkey was its uncle. It did not know how to deal with it, so it had to quickly please it. The black donkey hummed twice and seemed very satisfied and comfortable. It clumsily patted the basket beside it with its front hooves and gestured for the big black horse to take some for itself, just like an elder giving snacks to a child. The big black horse understood and was ecstatic. It did not dare to take more and carefully held one in its mouth. Then it bowed its head repeatedly to show its most sincere respect and gratitude. It wagged its rump and tail to please the 8 horses before it trotted away. It returned to the front of the sedan and began to chew happily. The black donkey looked at its silly and shameless behavior and could not help but shake its head. It called softly as if it was sighing. Then it looked at Ning Ke and thought of his silly and shameless behavior when he fought with the shameless Taoist nun in the swamp yesterday. It shook its head again and called softly, looking very disappointed. Ning Ke was a little embarrassed. He thought that the combination of him and the big black horse was indeed a little embarrassing compared to the combination of youngest uncle and the little black donkey in terms of temperament and strength. The black donkey cawed twice, and the 8 horses in front of the sedan raised their heads and were ready to leave. Just as Ning Ke was about to speak, the black crows on the black horse carriage finally could not help but caw with him, looking very happy. The black donkey was furious. It did not care if you were Yama or a broken crow transformed by Haotian. How dare you imitate me and caw again? It was too disrespectful. The black crows were not real to begin with. Ning Ke could not kill them with arrows or talismans. But when they heard the black donkey's caw, they suddenly felt dizzy and did not dare to make another sound in fear. Looking at the broken sedan that was gradually moving, Ning Ke chased after it and shouted, "It's rare for us to meet. We should at least talk more. I'm considered youngest uncle's official disciple. I'm the only one who can use the Great Spirit now. His inheritance should be mine. If you continue like this, I won't be polite to you anymore." The black donkey bared its belly and faced Haotian leisurely. It did not care about Ning Ke at all. Ignoring him was the greatest humiliation. Ning Ke became even more embarrassed and said, "Then how can I find you in the future?" The black donkey still did not respond. Ning Ke said again, "Don't you want to go back to the academy? The headmaster is still alive, and so is the old yellow bull. Eldest brother and second brother are not children anymore. They should miss you very much." The black donkey hesitated slightly and turned to look at Ning Quebec. After a moment of silence, it grinned, revealing its white teeth as if it was laughing. Then, with a loud caw, it retracted its left foreleg and pointed its right foreleg to the north. The wild horses that were resting on the meadow raised their heads without hesitation when they heard the donkey's caw. They abandoned the first fresh grass they had eaten in more than 10 days and gathered into a herd to gallop. In an instant, smoke and dust rose and the sound of hooves was like thunder. Countless wild horses covered the entire wilderness and began to gallop at high speed. There was no disorder at all, and they seemed to be extremely disciplined, like an army. Ning Ke had thought that the black donkey was very funny when it retracted its hoof and stretched out its other hoof. Now, looking at the shocking scene of tens of thousands of horses galloping, he suddenly felt that the black donkey was like a majestic and inviolable general who was reaching out his right hand to guide his army to a target. The wild horses galloped away and the smoke and dust gradually settled. Ning Ke stood on the meadow and looked at the black dots that covered the mountains and plains in the distance. He looked at the broken sedan that was faintly discernible among them and remained silent. After a long time, he muttered to himself, "I'll never eat donkey barbecued again." Ning Ke vaguely understood that the black donkey was the leader of the wild horses. It had led countless horses through the two ends of the swamp and the cold plains in the north to chase after water and grass. Any place that the herdsmen could not go or the cavalry could not reach was their world of freedom. The truth in the herdsmen's legends might have been formed by the wild horses trampling through the swamp overgrown with water and grass over the past few decades. As for the bloody battle between him and Yi Hongyu, when he was about to die, the black donkey and the wild horses happened to pass through that place. There was no such coincidence or luck in the world. Naturally, the black donkey wanted to save him and bring him out of the swamp. But why are there 8 horses pulling the sedan? What's so special about it? He looked at the wild horses moving like shadows in the distance and asked subconsciously. Sang Sang placed her little face on the window and looked at the horses that were stirring up smoke and dust in the distance. She said, "Did youngest uncle and the headmaster of the academy like to send out 8 horses when they drank wine? Maybe?" Ning Kei walked into the horse carriage and looked back at the wild horses that were getting further and further away. He thought to himself that youngest uncle had been seeking freedom all his life. The black donkey was living such a life now. Why should he bother it and feel sad for it? The sky was blue and the field was vast. Cattle and sheep could be seen in the grass when the wind blew. Now that it was spring, the grass was not very tall. When the wind blew, the grass would bend slightly and then shoot up instantly. When the grass was standing, it could not block the sheep that were scattered in the meadow like clouds. The black horse carriage left Yueluan and passed through the mud and swamp. Finally, it came to the wilderness where the Golden Palace was. The Golden Palace was a country that was almost forgotten by all the countries in the Central Plains, except the Tang. Ning Kei joined the army in the city of Wei and belonged to the northern border military of the Tang Empire. He had been collecting firewood at Shubi Lake for many years and was naturally very familiar with the Golden Palace and the wilderness. The black horse carriage passed through the sparsely populated meadow in silence, like a black cloud. Also, try to finish before 2 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 654. The wilderness where the Golden Tribe Royal Court was located had a relatively good climate. Water and grass were fertile, and there were many cattle and sheep. They had lived for thousands of years and had a dense population, forming more than 20 large tribes. There were nearly 100,000 elite cavalries under the command of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Except for the Tang Empire, no other country was a match for the Golden Tribe Royal Court. It was because the Tang Empire had suppressed the Golden Tribe Royal Court in the wilderness for hundreds of years that the other countries in the Central Plains gradually forgot about the existence of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Even the South Jin Kingdom dared to boast that it was the second most powerful country in the world. Even the Tang Empire was reluctant to start a full-scale war with the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Princess Li Yu of the Tang Empire married into the wilderness to avoid the chaos caused by the Imperial Astronomer's edict. It also proved the importance of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to the Tangs. Ning Kei had dealt with the cavalries of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the horse gang disguised by the cavalries for many years. He was very clear about the strength of the barbarians in the wilderness. In addition to the extremely fierce cavalries with amazing horsemanship, there were more than 10 high priests supported by the royal court, whose cultivation was close to or even reached the knowing destiny state. Therefore, even though he knew that the Golden Tribe Royal Court did not believe in Haotian and there was no legend of the underworld invasion, he was still very vigilant when the black horse carriage traveled in the wilderness. Ning Kei was seriously injured in the battle with Yi Hongyu in the swamp and was slowly recuperating. Sang Sang used divine skills and consumed a lot of Haotian's divine light. The cold aura in her body became more and more restless. Even the Buddhist Dharma could not suppress it. She coughed badly and her body became colder and colder. He was very worried about Sang Sang's health and the people who wanted to kill her. Observing the tracks and ruts, He was sure that many cultivators from the Buddhism and Taoism sects had arrived in the wilderness. Fortunately, the sky of the wilderness was covered with dark clouds for several days after leaving the swamp. The dark cloud that had been following Sang Sang blended into the sky and was hard to distinguish. In the early spring of the wilderness, many birds flew from Min Mountain and the counties in the north of the Tang Empire. The black crow was no longer so dazzling. Ning Kai made vines and hung them around the horse carriage as a camouflage. He also used the mud from the gray powder rock to cover the big black horse. He used the gift of heaven to hide his tracks and continued to sneak eastward. One day, Sang Sang sensed that there were cultivators chasing after her from more than 10 miles away. Ning Kai looked at the vast plain in front of him. There was no place for him to hide, so he drove the horse carriage to a pile of rocks in the south and continued to hide. If he was discovered, it would be a good place for an ambush. The first to arrive at the field were not the cultivators who had been chasing after Sang Sang, but more than 100 grassland cavalrymen. Looking at the soft armor on the cavalrymen and the light chariot behind them, Ning Kai's expression turned serious. He judged that the cavalrymen should be the elites of the palace, and the people in the light chariot were most likely priests. A moment later, 3 cultivators arrived on horseback and met the elite cavalrymen of the Golden Palace in the field north of the pile of rocks. The 3 cultivators carried Taoist swords and should be from Haotian Taoism. However, it was unknown whether they were priests from the West Hill Divine Palace or visiting professors from a Taoist temple in the world. Ning Kai could not hear what they were talking about, but judging from the 3 cultivators' expressions and the grassland cavalryman's posture, he knew that the 3 cultivators had perfectly displayed the demeanor that cultivators showed to ordinary people, which was pride, indifference, and contempt. He could not help but fall silent, knowing that a battle was about to happen. There were 3 palaces among the barbarians of the wilderness. Among them, the right king's palace worshipped Buddhism and was not aggressive. The left king's palace was threatened by the desolate man's southward invasion, so they were forced to fight side by side with the allied forces of the Central Plains. Only the Golden Palace was the strongest and had never been stingy with their hostility towards the people of the Central Plains. If ordinary people had a natural reverence for cultivators, the cavalrymen of the Golden Palace obviously did not. With a whistle, dozens of cavalrymen left the camp and charged towards the 3 cultivators like lightning. The boxwood bows in their hands were already taut and ready to shoot. The 3 Haotian Taoism cultivators had been cultivating in the Taoist temples of the Central Plains all year round and were deeply respected by ordinary people. They would never have thought that ordinary people would dare to attack them. They immediately flew into a rage and pinched the sword formula. The Taoist swords behind them suddenly rose and flew with the wind in the wilderness, stabbing one of the cavalrymen in an instant. Ning Kai looked at the crisscrossing sword light and realized that the 3 cultivators were actually masters of the see-through state. One of them had even reached the peak of the see-through state. No wonder they were still so tough in the wilderness. Looking at the light chariot behind the cavalrymen, he still did not think that the 3 powerhouses from Haotian Taoism could defeat the elite cavalrymen. After all, this was the Golden Palace, not the Central Plains where cultivators could be arrogant. The dozens of cavalrymen who stayed put were the first to shoot arrows. The arrows fell on the 3 cultivators like rain. One of the cultivators called back his Taoist sword and set up a sword screen in front of him to block most of the arrows. Then, the cavalrymen pulled out short spears from the side of their saddles and threw them again with a deep roar. The short spears were much heavier than the arrows. The dozens of short spears pierced through the air with a shocking momentum. The cultivator pinched the sword formula and kept slashing in the air with his Taoist sword. However, he could no longer block the short spears as easily as he did with the arrows. His Taoist sword was even trembling from the attacks. After a dozen muffled sounds, the hard short spears were inserted into the ground of the wilderness. One of them stabbed into the abdomen of a horse ridden by a cultivator. That horse neighed miserably, jumping about in pain, immediately throwing that cultivator off its back. The leader of the cavalrymen shouted, and the dozens of cavalrymen who stayed put also joined the charging team. The first dozens of cavalrymen were extremely fast and were already in front of the three cultivators. The three powerhouses from Hautian Taoism suddenly looked serious and used their psyche power. For a moment, the sword light flashed and there were cavalrymen falling off their horses or horses neighing and falling. However, the power of the Taoist sword was limited and could only make a small cut on the leather armor. Moreover, many of the cavalrymen were hiding in the bellies of the horses and could not be pierced by the flying swords. The distance of dozens of feet seemed very long, but it was very short for the cavalrymen of the Golden Palace. After a few breaths, more than 100 cavalrymen surged over like waves and drowned the three cultivators in an instant. There were only a few clean swishing sounds and blood splattered. The cavalrymen of the palace scattered and the three powerhouses from Hautian Taoism fell to the ground in the middle of the field. They had already become corpses. The powerhouse at the peak of see-through was lying in the grass, covered in blood. He held an item in each of his hands. The one in his right hand was his life-saving measure, and the one in his left was a firework communication device. According to the agreement, if he saw Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama, he had to turn on the device and inform the main force. However, whether it was his life-saving measure or the firework communication device, he did not have time to turn it on before he was killed by the wolf-like cavalrymen of the palace. One could imagine how fast it all happened. The cavalrymen of the palace cleaned up the battlefield and left quickly. Looking at the number of corpses on the horses, there were only about a dozen people who died under the flying swords of the three cultivators. A chance encounter in the wilderness turned into a sudden battle. The three cultivators in the see-through state, faced with more than 100 cavalrymen of the palace, did not seem to have any ability to resist and were killed cleanly. The black horse carriage came out of the pile of rocks and turned south. Ning Ke thought about the bloody battle that had suddenly started and ended. After a moment of silence, he once again confirmed a point of view. Non-martial cultivators, if they had not joined the devil or entered the knowing destiny state, would never be a match for the army. This conclusion was completely different from the impression of most ordinary people in the world, but it was the truth. Because cultivators had a weakness that could not be solved, and that was their bodies. The bodies of cultivators were as weak as those of ordinary people, and it was the same when they entered the knowing destiny state. Whether it was feather arrows or machetes, they could easily take their lives, not to mention the tens of thousands of arrows shot at the same time when two armies fought, or the terrifying catapults and ballistae during sieges. More importantly, cultivators used the chi of heaven and earth to control their natal flying sword. The killing range of the flying swords was limited by the degree of psyche power. Most flying swords could not exceed the range of feather arrows. Moreover, if the flying swords wanted to break all kinds of armors, they had to be extremely sharp. However, they could not be too thin to avoid damage after breaking the armor, so it was extremely difficult to cast them. This was why ordinary cultivators did not dare to go against the country, and had to serve the imperial court of each country. This was also why, in the traditional view, a sword master always had a warrior as his bodyguard. When Ning Ke was serving in the army in the city of Wei, he had basically never seen cultivators, let alone fought with them. He only remembered General Ma's expression when he was drunk and told stories about the battlefield. General Ma's attitude was very contemptuous. He thought that cultivators were very strong individually, but not very useful on the battlefield. Therefore, he was not surprised by the result of the battle between cultivators and the army today. But the process of the battle surprised him. The palace priest in the light carriage did not make a move, and the cavalry easily and neatly finished the battle, turning the three cultivators into corpses. The elite cavalry of the Golden Palace was indeed strong, and even stronger than before. He looked out of the window at the scenery that was gradually becoming familiar, and his expression was slightly solemn. The heroic former Golden Palace Chanyu, Li Yu's man and Xiaomon's father, had died young, which was not necessarily a good thing. His younger brother had taken over the position of Chanyu, and now it seemed that the Chanyu was no less intelligent and capable than his elder brother. It was rumored that the Chanyu was more ambitious. Ning Ke was a Tang, and also a Tang soldier who had been stationed at the border for many years. Even though he was fleeing with Sangsang, he still could not help but start to worry about the situation at the northern border of the Tang Empire. Sangsang looked out of the window at the scenery of the wilderness, and her little face was slightly red from the wind. She said, "It looks a little familiar. Have we been here before?" Ning Ke looked out of the window and said, "I brought you here once. If we go further south, we will reach Shubi Lake." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 655. Shubi Lake was near. Could the city of Wei be far away? It was quiet in the carriage. Sangsang glanced at Ningquebec. Ning Ke did not respond. He had made a decision in the White Tower Temple. Now he did not even return to the academy. Why would he go to the city of Wei? Shubi Lake was located between the 7 stockade villages and the Golden Palace on the border of the Tang Empire. It was a rare freshwater lake in the wilderness. The rocky bottom of the lake, after years of erosion, extended to the west and connected with the elongated body of the lake. It looked like a comb, which was how it got its name. Caravans often stopped by the lake, so the horse gang often appeared here. The battle of blood and money lasted for many years. No one knew when it started, but the caravans were gradually forced to choose more remote and difficult routes, and Shubi Lake became a gathering place and hiding place for the horse gang. In the evening, the black carriage came to the periphery of Shubi Lake. The sky was covered by clouds, blocking most of the sunlight. It was as dark as night. From a distance, bonfires could be seen by the lake, singing could be heard faintly, and even the aroma of barbecue and liquor could be smelled. The carriage wheels rolled over the simple dirt road in the Rocky Mountains and dense forest by the lake, making a squeaking sound. It smoothly avoided the hidden sentries left by the horse gang and came to the lake. For Ning Ke, who had been here countless times and was familiar with Shubi Lake like home, it was a very accurate description to say that he was familiar with the road. There were more than 10 bonfires by the lake, divided into 3 places according to the distance. Hundreds of horse gang were eating and drinking around the bonfires, which should belong to 3 forces. The horse gang in the wilderness was the most cold-blooded and cunning creatures. They were extremely greedy and would never trust any outsiders, especially their peers. If these horse gang met in the wilderness, they might have already killed each other. But this would not happen at Shubi Lake because it was the rule. There was a very thick piece of firewood at the bottom of each bonfire, making a soft crackling sound. The flame was like a giant's tongue, constantly licking the rolling roast sheep. The fat dripping from the roast sheep was like the invisible giant's saliva. Singing, drinking, and women's coquettish whispers echoed in Shubi Lake. The horse gang drank and played with women, looking very happy. But their knives and arrows were very close to them, and they could pick them up at any time. The horse gang's machetes were generally not sheathed. Under the light of the fire, mottled bloodstains could be seen, some of which were very bright. Presumably, some caravans or lone patrolling cavalrymen were killed by the machetes not long ago. The horse gang had been very happy these years. The horse gang had been confronting the Tang Empire for a long time. Both of them were very cautious, so they seldom went into the wilderness to clear their enemies. Horse gang suddenly felt that the wilderness was much less. The Tang of the Tang. So horse gang was of Tang was Shaf the Tang of Tang. And Chen. The Chen. Of gang of Long of Shan of Chen of the kingdom. Horse gang also knew. Lake. Of Shan of Qing of less of mountain. Horse of Tian Shan was San. He had and Shan. Shan of Wang. Shan of Mountain of County of Tang Shan, Dynasty Shan, King of Tang Gang of Shan Mountain of Chun of Lake. A lonely horse carriage appeared at Shubi Lake in front of the 300 most ruthless horse bandits. It was like a little white rabbit walking into a pack of wolves that had been starved for countless days. However, the horse gang did not rush forward with a strange cry. Instead, they seemed to be somewhat vigilant. The 3 leaders of the horse gang looked at each other across the fire and saw the uneasiness in each other's eyes. Shubi Lake had long been famous, so neither caravans nor travelers would choose to stay overnight here. It was very strange that this black carriage came from the wilderness and dared to travel alone, even daring to come here. A horse gang leader looked at the black carriage and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I don't know where you come from. How could you come to our shabby house? Please come out and meet us." What answered this leader was an arrow. With a whoosh, an arrow accurately shot into the space between his eyebrows, drilling out a bloody hole. The leader's eyes widened, and just like that, he fell to the ground and died. The horse bandits around the bonfire were in an uproar. They pushed away the women in their arms, and stood up with their knives in their hands. Especially the dozens of horse bandits under the leader's command. They shouted sternly and rushed towards the carriage. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sound of the arrow was endless. In a very short time, 7 or 8 horse gang at the forefront had an arrow between their eyebrows. Like trees that had been cut down, they kept falling and heavily hit the ground. Ning Ke walked down from the carriage with the box of arrows on his back and a boxwood bow in his hand. He looked at the frightened horse gang and said, "When did Shubi Lake become your place?" The night was dark, and the bonfire was swaying in the wind. The dim light fell on his black academy uniform and his expressionless face, revealing his eyebrows and eyes very clearly. Shubi Lake was the lair of the horse gang in the wilderness. Even the border army of the Tang Empire had to form a team before daring to come here. However, this man actually said that Shubi Lake was his home? One of the leaders of the horse gang looked at his face and frowned, as if he was recalling something. Suddenly, his face turned pale as he thought of the bleak, stormy, and miserable time a few years ago. He turned around and ran to his mount. As he ran, he desperately kicked his subordinates who were still in a daze. He shouted in a trembling voice, "You're all King blind. Get up and follow me." The horse gang around the bonfire did not understand why their leader suddenly became like this. They thought that although the man's archery was excellent, he was only one person. How could he kill more than 300 horse gangs? Big Brother was usually the bravest and most ruthless. How could he become more timid than a woman today? Another horse gang leader also remembered at this time. Looking at the young man beside the black carriage, he shouted with a pale face, "Hurry up, the woodcutter is back." The bank of Shubi Lake fell into a dead silence. The horse gang's expressions became extremely strange, as if the world had frozen. Then the next moment, with an extremely shrill scream, the horse gang came to their senses and fled in all directions. The woodcutter! It's the woodcutter from the city of Wei. The woodcutter! In the unwritten history of Shubi Lake, the most famous figure was not the legendary former horse gang leader who hid 10,000 taels of gold at the bottom of the lake, but a young Tang soldier in the city of Wei. The Tang army called the activities of cleaning up the horse gang or robbing the horse gang by pretending to be the horse gang as firewood collecting. Those who carried out this activity must be the best elite cavalry, generally called woodcutter or woodcutter. Since the young Tang soldier in the city of Wei joined the team of firewood collecting, the woodcutter mentioned by the horse gang in the wilderness only referred to that young man. This was the woodcutter of Shubi Lake that the horse gang had been talking about. The young Tang soldier did not rob the most taels of silver, nor did he kill the most horse gang, but he was definitely the object that the horse gang of Shubi Lake feared the most. Those miserable days were still a pain in their memories until today. It was not until the young Tang soldier left the city of Wei and went to Chang, and that the horse gang of Shubi Lake regained their courage and regained the pleasure and happiness of wielding knives in the wind. The woodcutter of Shubi Lake was the nightmare of all the horse gang. There was no horse gang that was not afraid of him. When the news from Chang'an spread to the wilderness, the horse gang knew that he had become a student of the second floor of the academy and the most trusted subordinate of the Tang Emperor. Their fear and even some abnormal admiration suddenly rose to the peak. But at the same time, they thought that he was already a person from another world and could not come back to Shubi Lake to deal with the relatively lowly horse gang, so they were a lot more relieved. But tonight the woodcutter returned to Shubi Lake again. Countless screams sounded by Shubi Lake. Women were screaming, and the usually cold-blooded and cruel horse gang were also screaming like women. It was chaos around the bonfire and the horses' hooves were hurrying. In a very short time, hundreds of horse gang left with their women like the wind, and the lakeside became extremely quiet. During this process, none of the horse gang members dared to attack Ningquebec. No one even dared to look at where he was. They looked terrified and even thought it was ridiculous. Ning Ke carried the boxwood bough on his shoulder, pulled the reins, and led the black carriage to a bonfire by the lake. Then he helped Sang Sang down from the carriage, and let her sit on the carpet left by the horse gang. The roast lamb on the bonfire was still dripping with grease, giving off a tempting aroma. Ning Ke would not be polite to the horse gang. He took out a sharp knife, picked the best part, and cut 3 large plates of meat. Then he went to the bonfire and took out 2 unopened leather bags of liquor and handed them to Sang Sang. Sang Sang ate the meat and drank the liquor in small mouthfuls. Ning Ke ate the meat and drank the liquor in small mouthfuls. In a short time, he finished the roast meat on the plate and drank the liquor in the bag. Ning Ke turned to look at Shubi Lake, which he had not seen for many years. Sang Sang looked at his profile and said, "Aren't you afraid that the horse gang will reveal our whereabouts?" Shubi Lake is the sphere of influence of the Tang Empire. Neither the Golden Tribe nor the Buddhism or Taoism sects dare to enter at will. Even if they want to kill us, it should be the Tangs who do it. Ning Ke suddenly noticed that there was a pile of charred wood by the lake. The wood was surrounded by a circle of stones, and a whole leg of lamb was placed on top of it. It looked like an altar, but he did not know what god it was for. In his memory, neither the barbarians of the Golden Tribe royal court nor the horse gang had such a worship ceremony. Beside a bonfire in the distance, a horse gang was so drunk that he passed out. He was ruthlessly abandoned by his companions and did not know what had happened. Ning Ke walked over and threw him into the cold lake. The horse gang immediately woke up after being hit by the cold lake water. It did not take Ning Ke much effort to find out what he wanted to know, such as the current situation of the city of Wei and the recent situation of the Golden Tribe royal court. He also knew that the simple altar by the lake was a religion that had been rising in the wilderness in recent years. The god that the religion worshipped was called Tungri. Ning Ke had never heard of this name, nor had he heard of this religion. After a moment of silence, he decided not to think about it anymore. He took out his padao and chopped off the horse gang's head. His movement of chopping off the head was very smooth, as if he had repeated it countless times. In fact, he had indeed done this movement so many times that it was more like a habit. After chopping off the horse gang's head, Ning Ke came to his senses. He was no longer a soldier of the Tang Empire, nor a woodcutter of Shubi Lake. There was no need to kill this person. However, if he killed them, then so be it. He would not feel any guilt. All the horse gang's hands were stained with the blood of innocent people. They all deserved to die. He had let the 300 horse gang go because he was very tired and not in the mood, and it was indeed difficult to kill all of them. Since this horse gang dared to get drunk at Shubi Lake, then he should die. It could be regarded as the woodcutter's worship or commemoration of Shubi Lake. I haven't eaten yet. I'm going to eat first. The next chapter may be at 1 o'clock in the night. If you can't wait, please go to bed first. You can read it tomorrow. Anyway, I'll try my best to continue writing. Now that the situation is grim, I need your monthly vote. Please vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 656. When Ning Ke woke up, it was still dark by the Shubi Lake. He poured the remaining mutton into the ashes of the bonfire in front of him and carried Sang Sang back to the carriage. Then he let the big black horse start the journey to the south. The black horse carriage was not as fast as it was a few days ago. It set off before dawn and arrived at the outskirts of the earthen city in the south of the Shubi Lake when it was almost noon. Sang Sang had already woken up. She leaned against the window and looked at the familiar scenery without saying anything. Her expression did not change until she saw the border city surrounded by Lus in the distance. Ning Ke looked at the small city in the distance and said, "Let's look at it more. We may never see it again." The two had lived in the Min Mountains since childhood, full of cruelty, blood, and betrayal. It was not until they came to the city of Wei to join the army that they finally had a relatively peaceful life and tasted the warmth of the human world for the first time. They had lived in this border city for many years and had their own home and many debt. The city of Wei was their real hometown. Ma Shixiang had been a deputy general in the city of Wei for many years. Because he had no family background and there was no big war between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe, it was extremely difficult for him to accumulate military merit. Therefore, he had never been promoted. In another year, he would retire from the border army and return to his hometown in Langya County. He was very satisfied with this because he had accumulated a lot of silver over the years. His only regret was that he had less money to collect firewood in recent years. Since that guy left the city of Wei with his handmaiden, the fate of the city of Wei seemed to have worsened. The pressure of the Golden Tribe royal court on the wilderness on the border of the Tang Empire gradually increased. Although the Golden Tribe royal court still dared not invade the border, the cavalrymen of the big tribes often pretended to be horse gangs and attacked the logistic teams heading to Helan City, which annoyed the 7 stockade villages, including the city of Wei, and even the entire northern border army. Now Ma Shixiang was more worried about another thing. Looking at the dark clouds gradually floating over the city of Wei, his gray hair trembled slightly. How could he deal with those bigwigs in the city? Now in the city of Wei, in addition to hundreds of experienced cavalrymen, many bigwigs also came a few days ago. 2 real generals of the Imperial Military Ministry with dozens of crossbowmen, more than 10 officials of the Imperial Center Administration, and 3 officials of the Imperial Astronomer all came to this inconspicuous border town for some reason. It was said that the other frontier fortresses in the Chiching Stockade village were in similar situations, but the city of Wei was obviously the focus of the bigwigs in Chang'an. There were several powerhouses from the Southern Gate Temple among the dozens of officials from the Imperial Center Administration. The powerful Yamen in Chang'an seemed to have transferred all its power here and directly took over the jurisdiction of the border. Surprisingly, the northern military camp did not make any violent reaction. There was no absolute secret in the world. The reason why these people came to the city of Wei had been spread 2 days ago. People in the city of Wei were shocked, but they had to accept it, because they all saw the order issued by the West Hill Divine Palace and knew that it was true. As the dark cloud drew closer, Ma Shixiang's mood became heavier and heavier. He did not know what he should do or what he could do. When the military official issued the military order, he was so confused that he did not hear it. "General Ma, did you hear what I said? Immediately lead the cavalrymen out of the city and rush to that cloud. Stop that black horse carriage at all costs." The military official shouted in a low voice. Ma Shixiang felt a little relieved and asked, "Only drive it away?" A gloomy Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple said, "If there is a chance to kill the daughter of Yama, of course we can't miss it. Then tell your subordinates to act according to the situation and cooperate with us." Hundreds of cavalrymen went out of the city of Wei, with several horse carriages among them. Ma Shixiang on the horse in the front was very silent, so were the cavalrymen. In the silent and depressing atmosphere, the team came to a slightly higher meadow. The dark clouds had already passed the meadow and were extremely wide. The front part was about to enter the city of Wei, but the back part seemed to stay near the Shubi Lake, covering the sky for many miles. The cavalrymen looked up at the clouds above their heads, still silent, but their expressions were extremely complicated. When they looked down, they saw the black horse carriage moving slowly under the clouds and exclaimed. Several adjutants and hundreds of cavalrymen looked at their superior at the same time. Ma Shixiang pulled the reins with blue veins slightly visible, but his face was expressionless and he did not give any orders. An official of the Imperial Center Administration got off the carriage and looked at the black horse carriage in the distance. His expression suddenly became serious, and he found that the cavalrymen around him did not move. He shouted angrily, "What are you waiting for?" Ma Shixiang said, "I received the military order not to let that black horse carriage enter the city. Now it has not entered the city, so we can only wait." The Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple shouted, "This is a great opportunity to kill the daughter of Yama. What are you hesitating for? Do you want to let that horse carriage go?" Ma Shixiang was still expressionless and said, "I am a soldier of the Tang Empire, and I only carry out military orders." The official of the Imperial Center Administration hurried to the horse carriage behind and looked at the official of the military ministry, who waved his arms angrily and shouted, "The military must cooperate with our action. You immediately order the cavalry to attack." The official of the military ministry was silent. The official of the imperial astronomer, who had the lowest position, tried to persuade him. Although the imperial court issued a document asking us to monitor and drive away, His Majesty did not say that we should take the initiative to attack. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had reappeared and were on the run, which caused a great disturbance in Chang'an. However, the forces within the empire had different views on this matter. Zhuge Warren, the chief officer of the Imperial Center Administration, was a trusted follower of the Empress. He wanted to gather the power of the empire to destroy the black horse carriage and kill Ning Ke, so as to remove a worry for the Empress. Although the Taoist cultivators of the Southern Gate Temple had no opinion on Ning Ke, they believed in Haotian, so of course they wanted to kill Sang Sang. Princess Li Yu was on good terms with Ning Ke and Sang Sang. However, in the face of the possible catastrophe of the human world, she had to remain silent. However, to everyone's surprise, the most powerful and important military force was not very active in this matter. For example, at this time, the high-ranking official of the military ministry had not said a word. The military of the Tang Empire had a very high status and only listened to the edicts of His Majesty and the military orders of their superiors. Therefore, the official of the Imperial Center Administration and the Taoist from the Southern Gate Temple could not force Ma Shixiang to attack with the cavalry of the city of Wei. Without the protection of the Tang cavalry, how could they dare to approach the black horse carriage? The cavalry of the city of Wei stood on the meadow and looked at the black horse carriage, while the people of the city of Wei stood on the earthen city wall and looked at the black horse carriage. Both inside and outside the city, the emotions were equally complicated. The people of the city of Wei had watched Ning Ke and Sang Sang grow up. They had never thought that Ning Ke would cause such a stir after leaving the city of Wei, and that his little handmaiden had become the Lady of Light. Ning Ke and Sang Sang were now well known in the world, and they were the most famous people in the history of the city of Wei. They were the pride of the city of Wei, the people who talked about them enthusiastically, and the light of the city of Wei. The boss of the gambling shop held the earthen arrow mound and looked at the black horse carriage in the distance. He sighed and said, "He still owes me more than a dozen gambling debts. It seems that he can never collect them in this lifetime." A black-faced ant looked at him and said sarcastically, The silver that Ning Ke and Sang Sing send from Chang and every month is distributed among the people of the city. Do you think that all the silver given to you has been fed to the dogs? The boss of the gambling shop smiled awkwardly, and then said nervously, I'm just joking. Speaking of which, the little girl had a hard time carrying a flagon to buy wine every day. Who would have thought that she would later become the Lady of Light, and finally the daughter of Yama? The people on the earthen city wall of the city of Wei already had complicated emotions. Many of them looked at the black horse carriage in the distance with horror and fear, and their faces turned pale when they heard about the daughter of Yama. The ant looked at the people's expressions and spat down the earthen wall. Bah! Ning Ke is full of evil tricks, and the whole city of Wei knows that. But Sang Sang is a kind girl, how could she be the daughter of Yama? That's what the West Hill Divine Palace said. The West Hill Divine Palace said that all the Tangs are guilty. Why don't you jump down to atone for your sins? The quarrels and even insults in the city of Wei did not affect the hundreds of cavalrymen on the meadow. It was still silent. An officer who had just come to the city of Wei this year could not bear the depressing atmosphere and the strong pressure from the officials of the Imperial Center Administration. He whispered to Ma Shixiang, General, killing the daughter of Yama is a great achievement. It's worth it even if it's risky. Ma Shixiang glanced at him and did not speak. Then he looked at the black horse carriage and frowned slightly. Suddenly he whipped the reins and went back to the meadow, ready to go back to the city. Hundreds of cavalrymen followed him down the meadow. A Taoist from the southern gate temple rushed to the front of Ma Shixiang's horse with a gloomy face. He scolded, Ma Shixiang, what are you doing? I'll kill you for running away in the face of battle. Ma Shixiang shouted, If His Majesty has a decree, I will send troops. If His Majesty doesn't have a decree, you old Taoist is nothing. The officials of the Imperial Center Administration rushed over and scolded him severely. Why did you stop the horse carriage outside the city? Ma Shixiang said, The horse carriage will not enter the city of Wei. The official scolded, Ning Ke is going back to the academy. How can he not enter the city of Wei? What do you know? Ma Shixiang looked at the official of the Imperial Center Administration and said contemptuously. Then he squeezed the horse's belly and pushed the official away. He led hundreds of cavalrymen away and soon entered the city of Wei. That night, Ma Shixiang and several adjutants, as well as all the cavalrymen who had participated in the activity of cutting firewood at Shubi Lake, crowded the only restaurant in the city of Wei. They talked about the story of Shubi Lake, the shabby courtyard, the little handmaiden carrying water, and the wine. Soon they drank all the wine stored by the owner of the restaurant. Ma Shixiang was the military chief of the city of Wei. No one dared to compete with him, so he drank the most. When he was drunk, he looked at the people in the restaurant and said, When Ning Ke left the city of Wei, he said 3 words to me. Because of those 3 words, I won't kill him. An adjutant belched and said, I asked you before what was the content of Ning Ke's 3 sentences, but you refused to tell me. Can you tell me now? Ma Shixiang stroked his beard and said, I can't say. That night, Ma Shixiang was drunk, and the whole city of Wei was drunk. Not bad, only 10 minutes late. Everything else is fine, but my eyes are a little dizzy. Also, I write slowly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 657. The city of Wei was his hometown. The closer he was to the city of Wei, the more timid he felt. Looking at the dusty city in the distance and thinking of the years he spent here, even someone as indifferent as Ning Ke could not help but feel a little emotional. He looked past the city of Wei and continued to look south. He knew that there was Min Mountain, Hebei Prefecture, Chang'an, the Tang Empire, and the Academy. That was his and Song Song's homeland, but they could not go there. Or rather, they did not want to go there. because they did not want to bring the heavy dark cloud over their heads into the Tang Empire and bring disaster to the Tang Empire. The black carriage stopped outside the city of Wei for a while, and then set off again. It went around to the east, avoiding the 7 stockade villages and the border patrolling cavalries of the northern military camp. The Northern Expedition Army had been stationed at the frontier all year round, responsible for monitoring and deterring the powerful and ambitious Golden Palace. They were well trained and had fought countless tough battles. Whether in terms of armaments or military quality, they were the strongest among the 4 border armies of the Tang Empire. They were even stronger than the tens of thousands of cavalries under Xiaoho's command. Ning Ke used to be a member of the Northern Expeditionary Army. Of course, he knew how difficult it would be if he was discovered by the border patrolling cavalries. He had no confidence to escape from the northern military camp. Moreover, he did not want to fight with his comrades. So he became extremely cautious and accurately followed the route planned on the military map. He kept walking in the buffer zone between the Tang Army and the Golden Palace. Relying on his familiarity with the wilderness and the Northern Expeditionary Army, he passed through without any danger. As the escape continued, spring became deeper. But the 2 in the black carriage felt colder and colder. The walls of the carriage were covered with a thin layer of frost. It had nothing to do with the hot sea freezing and the approaching night. It was mainly because Sangsang's body was getting colder and colder, and her breath was like ice. And the black carriage kept going north. The Min Mountain, which stretched across the entire northern continent, was divided into 2 parts by a narrow gorge. People in the Central Plains used to call it the north and the south of the Min Mountain. People in the wilderness and some Taoists used to call the south the Min Mountain and the north the Tianqi Mountains, meaning the mountains abandoned by Haotian. At the western entrance of the narrow gorge that separated Min Mountain from the middle, there was a magnificent stronghold more than 1,000 feet high. It was called Helan, so the narrow gorge was also called the Helan Mountain Gap. Helan City was located in the depths of the wilderness, very close to the Golden Tribe Royal Court. However, it still belonged to the Tang Empire. It was the furthest territory of the Tang Empire. To be more precise, it was an enclave. This place was more than 1,000 miles away from Chang'an. If they wanted to transport supplies from the Tang mainland, the journey would be long and costly. Moreover, they needed many cavalrymen to protect them from being robbed by the horse gang or the fake horse gang. Even so, the tens of thousands of cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could still cut off the supply route at any time. After spending so many resources and taking such a big risk, the Tang Empire still struggled to maintain the existence and normal operation of Helan City. It was not because of the psychological malady of the Tang Empire, but because Helan City was very important to the Tang Empire. This magnificent stronghold far away in the wilderness was the symbol of the Tang Empire's power and spirit in the wilderness. It was the confidence of the Tang Empire's business groups in the wilderness. Most importantly, this magnificent stronghold guarded the only passage to the eastern wilderness, which was very important to the Tang Empire's trade. It was like a sharp and thick knife inserted between Tianqi Mountain and Min Mountain, separating the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the Left King's Court. It was of great strategic importance. Looking at the towering city wall between the 2 cliffs, Sangsang thought of Chang'an. However, the city wall of Helan City was built between the cliffs, which was more shocking. The cold wind blew in. She coughed and looked at Ning Ke, asking, north or east? If they went north from here, they would go deeper into the wilderness along Tianqi Mountain. The cold land was sparsely populated. If they went further north, they would reach the front gate of Devil's Doctrine. If they went further north, they would reach the snowfield that few people had been to. If a place without people was the safest place, Ning Ke should have taken Sangsang north to the snowfield. In that case, no one could find them except the great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace or the eminent monks of the Xiankong Temple. But for some reason, Ning Ke chose to go east. The further east they went, the closer they were to Helan City and the mountain. The white hair on the top of the mountain gradually turned into clear snow, and the steep cliffs gradually revealed themselves. Dark clouds covered Helan City. White clouds floated above the towering city wall. Hundreds of Tang soldiers appeared on the city wall. They could even hear the sounds of nooses being pulled and crossbows being pulled. There were 30 or 40 heavy carriages under the city wall. However, for some reason, the city gate was closed and the caravan was not allowed to enter. The atmosphere was very tense. Ning Ke looked at the dark clouds above his head and naturally knew why Helan City was closed. He thought that it was impossible to sneak into the caravan and pass the gate. The wheels of the carriage rumbled, but the ice and gravel on the ground did not scatter. Below Helan City, the attendants of the merchant group were hiding in their carriages to avoid the cold. They were thinking about how to contact the general in the city and quickly enter the city. Hearing the sound of the wheels of the carriage, they could not help but look back curiously. When they saw the black carriage, their expressions changed. Through the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace and the portrait annotations of various imperial courts, this black carriage was now very famous. Everyone knew that the legendary daughter of Yama was in this carriage. Helan City was in a panic. The shouts of the merchants and guards rose and fell one after another. The horses that were tired from the long journey neighed in fright. Someone saw the opportunity and ran to the foot of Helan City, banging on the city gate with all his might. The gate of Helan City was wedged deep into the mountain. It was made of iron and wood and was extremely heavy and thick. When the merchant's palms fell on the gate, it was like a mosquito's wings flapping on a stone. It could only make a very faint sound. Even if the soldiers in the city heard the sound, they would not open the gate at this time. When the dark clouds approached Helan City, the city gate was closed and no one was allowed to enter or leave. They were guarding against the black carriage. How could they give it a chance to rush into the city? The black carriage passed by the caravan of the caravan of the caravan. The frightened caravan hurriedly pulled the reins and moved the carriages further away to make way for the black carriage. After a moment of chaos, there was absolute silence, even dead silence. Ning Ke did not care about the merchants and guards who were on guard. He drove the carriage to the front of the mountain and walked to the city gate. He looked up at the two mountain-like gates. On the city wall, the sound of the crossbows gradually subsided. Several crossbows struggled to adjust their angles and aimed at Ningquebec. Hundreds of archers and crossbowmen aimed at the black carriage a little further away, ready to shoot at any time. Even the sound of burning oil and stones could be heard. The Tang army in the city actually treated him as a troop to attack the city. Faced with so many well-trained Tang soldiers, even if all the cavalries and priests of the Golden Tribe royal court came out, they would not be able to attack the city in a short time. Ning Ke knew that he could not be forced. "I am Ningquebec. I want to pass the city." He looked up and said. His voice was not loud, but it clearly spread to the top of the city wall and into everyone's ears. Then he continued, "I used to be a member of the Northern Expedition Army. I have made countless military achievements, which can be found in the archives of the military ministry. I don't want to fight with you. I just want to exchange my military achievements for a pass." Helan City was extremely important to the Tang Empire. The highest military officer in the military was habitually called General Helan. His position was second only to the 4 generals and a few old generals in Chang and City. The current General Helan was named Han Qing. He had been stationed in the bitter cold city for more than 10 years. He was half barbarian, but he was deeply trusted by His Majesty and was given such an important task. Under the protection of more than 10 shield-bearers, General Han Qing came to the city wall. He looked down at Ning Ke and said, "Tang soldiers are ashamed to talk about asking for rewards. Don't even think about bringing the daughter of Yama into the city. I don't want to enter the city. I want to cross the city. This road is blocked." "Why not? As a general of the Tang Empire, How can I let you bring this demoness into the city of Tang? In your eyes, my wife will bring disaster to the world, so you don't let us pass? That's right. If the carriage passes the city, it will be out of the Tang Empire. Even if it is a disaster, it will only bring disaster to others. Why not? If I go to the East Wilderness, I will accept my fate. But I don't want to be killed in my own country. General Han Qing seemed to be touched by Ning Kei's last sentence and remained silent. A deputy general beside him said anxiously, "General, what are you hesitating for? This person is so stupid that he dares to curse under the city wall. Quickly release the arrows and stones and seize the opportunity to kill this person." Another deputy general frowned slightly and said, "Is Ning Kei so easy to kill? No matter how powerful a cultivator is, he can't be killed." I said it's not easy to kill, not that he can't be killed, but in the Tang Empire, no one is willing to do it. Don't forget that he is Mr. 13 of the Academy. These days, when the dark clouds came, the military ministry and the northern military camp were extremely quiet and did not seriously search for this black carriage. Why? Because he doesn't want to bear this responsibility. Do you want us to bear it? Are you really going to let him bring the daughter of Yama into the city? Of course not, but this is a cultivator's business. If we want to kill him, we have to wait for the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple to come. The daughter of Yama will destroy the whole world. This is not a cultivator's business, it is all our responsibility. As soldiers, how can we be so timid and give in? Stop arguing. General Han Qing scolded coldly. Whether it is to kill or let go, or to block him outside Helan City and wait for those cultivators to come, it is not something we can decide ourselves. General, what are you going to do? Of course, I will ask His Majesty. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 658. His Majesty was far away in Chang'an. If he wanted to ask for instructions, it would take a long time to go back and forth, and the black horse carriage was already at the foot of the city. General Han Qing's words sounded like irresponsible nonsense. However, no one in the room showed such emotions. They just looked a little surprised. The Tang military had set up 3 talisman teleportation arrays on the border. They could transmit short pieces of information through the air. One of them was set up in Helan City and could directly connect to the Imperial Palace in Chang'an. Teleportation formations could only transmit very little information, and the amount of resources required to activate them was unimaginable. This was especially true for the one in Helan City. Because the communication distance was too great, the cost was even greater. According to the designer's calculations, using it once would require 10 years' worth of supplies for Helan City. According to the military regulations of the Tang Empire, the teleportation array could only be activated in dangerous times, such as when the Golden Tribe was invading, or when the Left King's palace was trying to break through from the eastern wilderness to threaten the Tang Empire. Since a sage from the Academy had set up this teleportation array, the teleportation array in Helan City had only been activated twice in the past hundreds of years. However, it was activated again today because of a lonely horse carriage. It was quiet in the city tower. Other than the sizzling sound of the chi of heaven and earth condensing on the talisman array, no other sound could be heard. General Han Qing and the senior officers stared at the clean surface of the talisman array in silence. They did not know what kind of reply they would see later, and they all became very nervous. After an unknown period of time, a pale yellow light flashed, and a very small piece of paper appeared on the ground. When the Imperial Palace replied, they must have considered the resources needed to use the teleportation array and tried to reduce the weight as much as possible. General Han Qing walked forward and picked up the paper. He saluted with a serious expression and then showed it to everyone. There was no seal on the small paper, and there were 3 clear words written on it. The handwriting was not sloppy and was very serious, but it could not be considered outstanding. The generals could tell at a glance that it was the handwriting of His Majesty. Let him go. After a moment of silence in the city tower, the deputy who strongly suggested to attack earlier frowned and said, "There is no seal, and there is no seal from the military ministry. This paper has no effect." Han Qing glanced at this person and said in a slightly cold voice, "According to the military rules of Helan City, the paper passed by the formation comes from the Imperial Palace. Since it is written by His Majesty himself, it is equivalent to an imperial edict." The Deputy General was a little nervous, but he still insisted on his opinion. He said in a low voice, "Ning Ke is a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. We can deal with him outside the city, but if we let him in, how many of us will die to suppress him? If something happens to Helan City, who will bear the responsibility?" General Han Qing coldly reprimanded, "The soldiers of our great Tang have the duty to obey military orders. His Majesty's imperial edict is the highest military order. If His Majesty says it's possible, then it's possible. As for the responsibility, it's the responsibility of all the people of the Empire." The formation was activated, and the huge wooden plate began to rotate. The ropes rubbed against the tung oil, emitting a subtle sound. The heavy, high, and narrow city gates slowly opened. The black horse carriage drove into Helan City, following the narrow riding path at the bottom of the mountain, heading east. There were steep cliffs on both sides of the road, and dozens of sturdy mountain forts were built between the cliff. In each fort there was a small camp. No one knew how many supplies and weapons were stored in them, making people feel fearful just by looking at them. Between Helan City and the cliffs, countless hardwood bows had been pulled taut. Dozens of ballistae kept slowly adjusting their angles, aiming at the black horse carriage. Under the command of the officer, more than 10 catapults tightened their springs, ensuring that once an attack was launched, those huge rocks would be thrown at the same time, burying the horse carriage. If anyone dares to ignore the military order and move first, his head will be chopped off, General Han Qing said with a serious expression. He ordered the Deputy General to bring his bodyguards to watch the most powerful ballistae and catapults. Then, under the protection of the shield soldiers, he went to the eastern city wall and looked at the black horse carriage with narrowed eyes. After a while, the Deputy General hurried back and whispered a few words into his ear. Han Qing's face suddenly became a little ugly. He did not expect that someone would actually dare to make a move. "Where is he?" General Han Qing asked coldly. The Deputy General replied in a low voice, "Deputy General Xiao and his bodyguards have been disarmed and locked up. Chop off his head." General Han Qing said expressionlessly. The Deputy General's expression changed slightly. He thought that although military orders were like a mountain and could not be taken lightly, it was understandable that Deputy General Xiao wanted to kill the daughter of Yama. Moreover, he was a trusted aide of the Empress. General Han Qing knew what he was thinking and said with a frosty expression, "I don't care if he is the Empress's man or the Princess's man. Any soldier who dares to question or oppose His Majesty's order does not have the right to continue living. And he is very clear that if this horse carriage is attacked, many people in Helan City will die today." Thousands of Tang soldiers stood on the walls of Helan City, in the fortifications on the cliffs, and behind the barracks and arrow mounds on the slopes. They looked at the black horse carriage silently and with complicated expressions, as if they were sending it off. The Deputy General once again returned to General Han Qing's side. The saber at his waist gave off a faint smell of blood. He followed the general's gaze and looked at the black horse carriage. His mood also became very complicated. From an ordinary soldier in the city of Wei to his current position, how many people have there been since the founding of the Tang Empire? All these years, who in the Northern Army is not proud of him? Who in the Northern military camp does not treat him as a goal and an idol to strive for? General Han Qing looked at the black horse carriage and was very emotional. The deputy general sighed and said, "It's a pity that a beauty is a source of trouble. Heroes will eventually fall for the charms of a beauty. Ning Ke could not have achieved what he has today without the nurturing of His Majesty and the Academy. But in the end, he did not care about the safety of the Tang Empire and the world, and insisted on doing things his own way. He is really heartless and a bastard to the extreme." At this moment, a gust of wind blew in the Helan Mountains, causing the window of the black horse carriage to make a whistling sound. The curtain flew up and revealed a girl's face. The girl's face was slightly pale and she looked ordinary. Her short hair was blown into a mess by the wind, and she looked like a ball of wild grass. General Han Qing looked at her and said, "How is this a beauty? How can she be considered a beauty?" The deputy general also saw the girl's face and was a little surprised. After a moment of silence, he said, "It seems that Ning Ke is actually a person who values friendship and righteousness. Although he chose the wrong person, he is still worthy of admiration." General Han Qing said, "To be able to make His Majesty look at her differently, she is naturally extraordinary." As soon as they left the defensive area of the Helan city, Ning Ke let the big black horse speed up. They broke through the snow and crushed the ice along the way, stepping on the cold ground and following the narrow Helan Mountains, running wildly towards the east. The snowy peaks high up in the canyon did not move fast in their field of vision, and the nearby cliffs had already turned into a rapidly receding gray line. One could imagine how shocking the speed of the black horse carriage was now. Sang Sang was a little surprised and did not understand why they suddenly wanted to speed up. Ning Ke saw her expression but did not answer. He silently and focused on driving the horse carriage, pushing the speed to the maximum. Ning Ke needed speed now. Starting from Shubi Lake, the black horse carriage entered the traditional sphere of influence of the Tang Empire. The cultivators and powerhouses of the two sects of Buddhism and Taoism could not chase and kill them like they did before because of various kinds of fear. But no one would give up. God knew how many forces had been watching them and guessing the route of the black horse carriage. The large dark clouds in the sky and the dozens of black crows were constantly reporting their whereabouts to the human world. When the black horse carriage came to Helan City, many people might have already guessed where they were going. Out of the Helan Mountains, they would enter the eastern wilderness and leave the sphere of influence of the Tang Empire. There were countless forces in the wilderness, including the Left King's Palace, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, the Desolate Man's Tribe, and many powerhouses. Ning Ke did not know who would be waiting for him in the wilderness after passing through this mountain range. Since that was the case, no matter how fast the black horse carriage traveled, it seemed to be meaningless. Then why did he choose this? The dark clouds fell on the silver mask, making it look even darker. Long Qing looked at the thick dark clouds in the sky, covering the sky and covering the earth from the west. The corner of his mouth that was exposed outside the mask slowly rose. He said, "The ending of your story, of course, should be written by me." Then he lowered his head and continued writing. The soft pen tip kept moving on the letter paper. He drew a diagram, which seemed to be the attack and defense diagram of a large city gate. Then he wrote a few simple lines. He sealed the letter with lacquer and handed it to a former commander of the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. He said calmly, "When you arrive at Capital Qing, hand this letter to him personally and tell him that if an opportunity arises, we must seize it." The depraved commander accepted the order, jumped on his horse, and galloped towards the south. As a trusted follower of Prince Long Qing, he only knew this secret recently. Thinking of the discussions in the human world in the past, he could not help but feel a little cold. His respect for Prince Long Qing increased. Prince Long Qing looked at the horse riding away and was silent for a long time. He found that he had become unfamiliar with his homeland and could not help but shake his head. His journey was in the realm of light and darkness, How could it be in the mortal world? He walked slowly to the edge of the cliff and looked at the exit of the mountain, which was about 100 feet wide. His expression gradually calmed down. Behind him, there were more than 10 powerhouses at the peak of the see-through state and 2 ordinary-looking old men in ordinary clothes. On the wilderness not far away, there were also 3,000 cavalrymen of the left king's palace. Using so many people to write the ending of the story for the black horse carriage, Prince Long Qing felt that he had already shown enough respect to the 2 people in the horse carriage. The dark clouds in the sky had passed over the towering snow-capped peak and went deep into the center of the wilderness. The sound of hoofbeats was hurried. The black horse carriage under the clouds finally drove out of the Helan mountain gap and came to the wilderness. It came to a slow stop in front of Long Qing. Long Qing sat on the horse and looked at the black horse carriage at the foot of the hill. He reached out and took off the silver mask on his face, revealing his burned cheek. He smiled slightly and looked particularly ferocious. Also, try to finish the next chapter before 1 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 659. A black carriage, thousands of elite cavalries of the left king's palace, Prince Long Qing, and a dozen fallen commanders at the peak of the see-through state. The disparity in power between the 2 sides was so great that it could not even be called a confrontation. Ning Kei's voice came from the black carriage. I didn't expect you to be the first one to come. Long Qing replied, I am now the master of this wilderness. You should be able to guess. Ning Kei said, Don't you understand that the Divine Hall is just using you as a dog? It's better to be Haotian's dog than a ghost in the underworld. Long Qing paused for a moment and continued, Of course, I can accept being Yama's dog if I have to. Ning Kei said, You are still so ambitious. It seems that you are not here to kill us. Then why do you have to make such a big scene? When I believed in Haotian and was willing to dedicate my life and soul to the light, she was the daughter of light. When I suffered the most painful experience in the world and decided to sacrifice my life and soul to the dark night, she became the daughter of Yama. Don't you think it's interesting? Long Qing hid in the cliff and looked down. He said, When I was drinking in Chang'an, I lost to Miss Sangsang. This might be the proof of fate, so I will not kill her. Then he laughed heartily and said, But I will kill you, because I also want to try to be the protector of the daughter of Yama. So if the dark night really comes, I can get some benefits from it. If not, I will naturally hand her over to Haotian. Ning Kei lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked somewhere in the cliff. He heard the laughter but did not see Long Qing. He could not help but sneer, thinking that this guy was becoming more and more cautious. He said to the cliff, Not everyone is qualified and strong enough to swing between the light and the dark. There are very few people who can be swayed between the light and the dark. If you continue like this, you will die miserably. Long Qing's calm and confident voice came from the cliff. In between black and white is gray. This color is the most moderate and the safest. Ning Kei did not want to discuss metaphysical and philosophical issues with this person, even the simplest debate. He said directly, Since you want to kill me, why don't you come out? What are you afraid of? Long Qing said, You are about to die. Why should I come out? Ning Kei said, If I die, she can't live either. Long Qing said, I know you are cold-blooded, but I didn't expect you to be so cold-blooded to her. Ning Kei said, I just know that if I die, she won't want to live. Long Qing's voice disappeared for a moment and then sounded again. He seemed a little emotional. When did you become so narcissistic? Is this the temperament of the academy? I'm not you. I'm never narcissistic. I'm just confident. Ning Kei looked at the cliff and said, If you weren't so narcissistic, you wouldn't have said so much nonsense. I'm confident that if you dare to appear in front of me, I can shoot you to death. Long Qing said, I have now entered the upper state of knowing destiny, and my cultivation is far above yours. Not to say that it is difficult to find an opponent, but it is easy for me to kill you. Where do you get the confidence to kill me? Ninkei said, when I was in the see-through state, I could shoot you to death in the Red Lotus Temple. Now that I have also entered the knowing destiny state, even the bald donkeys in the Xiankong Temple don't dare to take my arrows. Do you want to have a try? Long Qing's calm voice echoed between the cliff. No matter how sharp-tongued and sarcastic I am, it is meaningless. I am not saying these words to you to make you happy before you die. I just want the thousands of arrows to confirm your position. Do you regret talking with me? Just as he was speaking, a dense buzzing sound suddenly rang out from the wasteland outside the eastern entrance of the Helan Mountains. It sounded like countless locusts flapping their wings and flying in the air. It was an extremely terrifying sight. Thousands of arrows shot into the gray clouds and then fell down in an arc, like a rainstorm falling on the black horse carriage in the valley. The shrill whistling of the arrows affected each other, layer upon layer, and sounded like thunder. People like Ning Kei and Long Qing would never say meaningless words before a battle. If they did, it must be a part of the battle, or to suppress the opponent's morale, to do psychological warfare, or to buy time for some preparation. During this conversation, Prince Long Qing informed the thousands of cavalrymen in the wilderness of the black horse carriage's exact location, thus forming the first terrifying volley of arrows. Ning Kei, on the other hand, not only was simply stalling for time, he also untied the big black horse's bridle. The dense whistling of the arrows broke through the air, like a rainstorm covering the sky and clouds. Ning Kei opened the front door of the horse carriage, and the big black horse turned around at lightning speed. Its front hooves were in the air, and its hind hooves kicked the ground, and it jumped into the carriage. Tuck, tuck, tuck. Countless arrows fell on the black horse carriage, fiercely piercing the roof and the walls on both sides of the carriage. The crisp sound of impact sounded continuously outside the carriage, as if there would never be a moment to stop. However, the arrows did not cause any damage to the horse carriage. The arrows with great power hit the carriage heavily, and then it was tragically broken into two pieces, falling like real rain. The sharp arrowheads could not even enter the carriage, not even leaving a mark on it. However, the rain of arrows kept falling, and the sound of arrows falling continued. The sound of impact on the walls of the carriage kept echoing inside the carriage, and many clear sounds of arrows breaking could be heard. In a very short period of time, the thousands of cavalrymen of the left king's palace in the wilderness had already shot out 3 rain of arrows. The range of the grassland cavalrymen's hardwood bows was extremely long, and their shooting skills were even more amazing. At such a long distance, the thousands of arrows were actually controlled within an area of about 200 feet. At this time, the ground had already been pierced with arrows, densely packed, like weeds growing on the most fertile land. Some arrows even pierced above the first layer of arrow grass, which looked very funny. The arrows around the horse carriage were even denser, but most of the arrows that hit the carriage broke in the middle, so there was no long grass here, but more like a pile of straw, gradually drowning the horse carriage. The black horse carriage was made of stainless steel, and no matter how many arrows attacked, it could not be destroyed. However, being in such a dense rain of arrows, it still felt a little uneasy. Ning Kei hugged Sang Sang tightly in his arms. The carriage was very spacious, so the big black horse could enter. However, its body was also very big, so it could only bend its hooves and bury its head like a dog. It leaned on Ning Kei's knees in humiliation like a pet. Sang Sang had been a little confused since they chose to go east outside Helan City. Finally, she could not help but ask softly, "Why are we here? What do you want to do?" The big black horse's head rested on the carriage, looking a little bored. Ning Kei reached out and touched the mane on its neck, saying, "I'm betting." Sang Sang frowned slightly and asked, "Betting on what?" Ning Kei said directly, "Betting that someone will come to save us." Sang Sang said straightforwardly, "No one will come to save us." After a moment of silence, Ning-Ke said, "Indeed, no one will come to save us, but I think some people will not want to miss this opportunity. We have used so many arrows, those people should be more confident." Sang-Sang vaguely guessed his thoughts and said, "I don't know if those people will come." Ning-Ke said, "I don't know, maybe they are already here." Long Qing knew that the black horse carriage was very strong, but he still wanted to try. Now that he had basically controlled the left king's palace, no one dared to question any of his decisions. Moreover, under the secret operation of the West Hill Divine Palace, the left king's palace had received a large number of weapons from the Central Plains. He had the strength and the qualifications to waste them like this. After confirming that the rain of arrows could not cause any damage to the black horse carriage, he was not disappointed, because thousands of cavalrymen had already arrived in front of the Helan Mountain Gap under the cover of the rain of arrows and began to charge. "Go!" He put the silver mask on his face again. More than a dozen fallen knight commanders responded in a low voice. Then they lifted the reins and rushed down from the cliff, leading thousands of grassland cavalrymen towards the black horse carriage at the gorge. The hoofbeats were like thunder and the dust billowed. Thousands of cavalrymen poured into the Helan Mountain Gap, but there was no blockage. Instead, they poured in like a black tide and flowed back again, easily drowning the black horse carriage. Long Qing was very clear that as long as the Tang army in Helan City did not come to rescue, Ning-Ke would die today. No matter how strong a cultivator was, it was impossible to escape in such an environment. Helan City was more than 200 miles away from here, and the key was that the Tang army in that city could not come to rescue Ning-Quebec. He no longer looked at the battlefield at the gorge, because the outcome of the battle was already determined, and it could not arouse any interest in him. Then Ning-Ke, who was about to die, was once his lifelong enemy in the eyes of the world. Looking at the dark clouds in the sky, Long Qing began to think about how to get the most benefits after catching Sang-Sang, and how to avoid the dark clouds. After thinking about it, he found that his state of mind was a little restless. He could not help laughing at himself, and found that he still cared about Ning-Ke's death. The dark clouds in the sky fell on his face, and fell on the bright silver mask. The silver mask became a little gray, just like his eyes. The next moment, the silver mask became even more gray. Long Qing's smile suddenly froze. With a shrill cry, he jumped off the horse and swept down the cliff behind him like lightning. Rumbling sounds of impact rang out, mixed with the mournful neigh of a horse. Countless rocks rolled down from the cliff, smashing his mount into pieces of flesh and blood. It was a tragic sight to behold. If he had not reacted quickly, he would have become a wisp of ghost under the pile of stones. Prince Long Qing suddenly turned around and looked at the cliff covered with snow, but he did not find any trace of the enemy. The silver mask on his face became dark again. It was not the dark clouds falling on it, nor the stones, but countless sharp and heavy axes flying over his head, falling on the heads of the cavalrymen in the gorge. There are only 2 chapters today, but I will still write a single chapter. Bow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 660. Countless rocks fell from the mountain peak. Those rocks had snow on them and were wet from the melting snow. When they landed on the mountains and the cliffs, they smashed into countless pieces. Then, they suddenly bounced into the air and continued to fall down. In the end, they landed on the heads of the cavalrymen at the exit of the canyon. After such a long distance, the speed of the stones had become terrifying, much more terrifying than the short spears that the grassland cavalrymen were used to throwing. The grassland cavalrymen were huddled together, and it was difficult for them to dodge. Countless stones fell on them, making muffled sounds of dust flying up. Some of them had large holes in their bodies, while others had their heads explode like ripe melons. The exit of the canyon was immediately dyed with blood and flesh. There were howls and neighs of horses everywhere. The troops were in a mess and the horses were galloping, causing smoke and dust to rise. Many of the cavalrymen had blood on their faces, and under the blood was a look of despair. However, what happened next really made them despair, because after the stones fell, there was a rain of axe shadows. Countless sounds of breaking air were heard. At least 1,000 heavy axes were thrown from the cliffs, smashing into the grassland cavalrymen who were in chaos. The stones falling from the peak were heavy, and so were the axes. To be able to throw them such a long distance required a lot of strength. Logically speaking, only martial cultivators could have such an ability. However, it was impossible to find so many martial cultivators in the world, and they could also organize into a well-disciplined ambush army. After the sky full of axes, there were earth-shattering shouts. More than 2,000 young men dressed in animal skins were jumping, running, and roaring as they charged down the cliff. They were not martial arts cultivators, but they were not weaker than martial arts cultivators. This was because they were desolate men, born warriors. This was a one-sided massacre. Dozens of heavy stones fell on the carriage, which shook it violently. Then there was a thundering sound. The arrows beside the black carriage were like grass, and the broken arrows that were like piles of grain. They were all smashed by the stones and then crushed into pieces. The pieces were dyed red by the flesh and blood of the grassland cavalrymen, looking unusually bright. The big black horse looked out of the carriage. He could not see what was happening outside, but he knew that the situation was changing. He could not help but feel nervous and curious. Ning Ke whispered, "He's coming." The sounds of rocks falling, axes falling, and fighting continued without end. Only after a long time did it quiet down. Then, there was a burst of intense cheers and shouts, and finally, it returned to absolute silence. Ning Ke got off the carriage with Sang Sang in his arms. Last winter, the Left King's palace had betrayed the agreement with the Desolate Man's tribe and secretly joined hands with the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army to launch a sneak attack on the main force of the Desolate Man. They chased them for hundreds of miles and suffered heavy casualties. This spring, under the leadership of Tang, the wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, the Desolate Man's tribe sneaked into the Tianqi Mountains for several nights. They arrived at the gap of the Helan Mountains and climbed up the peak. They then ambushed the cavalry of the Left Tent Palace. Out of the 3,000 cavalrymen of the Left King's Palace, only a few hundred of them managed to escape. Out of the dozen or so fallen commanders, only 3 survived. Prince Longqing was seriously injured and only managed to escape from Tang's hands with the help of 2 hidden powerhouses of Hautian Taoism. There were corpses of grassland cavalrymen all around the canyon. Occasionally, there were a few warhorses standing guard beside their masters in a daze. More than 2,000 powerful Desolate Man warriors raised their iron axes high in the air and cheered excitedly. This was the perfect revenge of the Desolate Man on their betrayers. However, the cheers of the Desolate Man warriors stopped faster than expected. They looked at the black carriage surrounded by corpses in the middle of the canyon and gradually quieted down. Their faces showed fear. The emotions of the Desolate Man warriors were not complicated. Compared to the people in other parts of the world who saw the black carriage, they were just afraid, very simply afraid. Especially when the door of the black carriage was opened and Ning Ke helped Sang Sang out. The Desolate Man warriors looked at the thin and weak little girl as if they were looking at the knight that they were most afraid of. Many people are easily intoxicated by the pleasure of revenge, but I don't think it's interesting at all, even though I have been doing it for the first half of my life. Because revenge requires hatred first, and that means suffering losses first. Ning Ke looked at the powerhouse dressed in leather a few feet away and said, "The Desolate Man is a natural warrior. You led so many desolate men and still lost so badly last winter. It's really hard to imagine." Tang thought of the bloody battle in the camp of the coalition army on the snowy night last winter. Even someone as strong as him was silent for a moment and then said, "You don't know how much power the West Hill Divine Palace has hidden." Ning Ke said, "I don't need to know these things. I only know that the desolate man is miserable now. Tang said, No matter how miserable we are now, if it weren't for us, you would have died today. Ning-Ke said, I knew you would come. This has nothing to do with me or Sang-Sang, so I don't need to thank you. I created such a good opportunity for you to ambush. If you can't even grasp it, the desolate man is not qualified to go south, let alone to restore their country. Wherever Sang-Sang was, the sky full of dark clouds and black crows would be there. The black carriage went along the northern wilderness of the Tang Empire to the east, attracting many people's attention along the way. At Helan City, Ning-Ke did not choose to go north, but east. He made such a big noise and exposed his whereabouts to attract the enemies of the eastern wilderness. The eastern wilderness had always been the sphere of influence of the left king's palace. Long Qing was now the master of this wilderness. Ning-Ke knew that Long Qing would definitely appear first to use him and the cavalry of the left king's palace to attract Tang and the desolate man warriors. The whereabouts of the black carriage spread to the eastern wilderness. The West Hill Divine Palace and the Buddhism sect did not have time to react. Long Qing could make it in time, and so could the desolate man. Tang did not know Ning-Ke's intentions. Even if he had some guesses, he could not be sure. But as Ning-Ke said, the desolate man would not let go of this opportunity for revenge. That was why Tang and the desolate man warriors appeared here. Tang said, We are here for revenge. So we will leave now. Ning-Ke said, Take us with you. Tang frowned slightly and said, You know that's impossible. Ning-Ke said, Why? Even if you don't thank me, I want to hear if you have any reasons. Tang looked at Sang-Sang beside him and said, Because she is the daughter of Yama. Ning-Ke said, I remember that the desolate man worships Yama. Tang said, Worshipping doesn't mean that they like him. It's more about fear. Ever since the desolate man believed in the Enlightenment doctrine, they have been worshipping Yama and begging him not to hurt us. Ning-Ke said, Sang-Sang is the daughter of Yama. If the desolate man does not protect her now, how do you think Yama will punish you and your people on the day of the underworld invasion? Tang said, If she dies, Yama may never find the human world. Naturally, there will be no underworld invasion. In that case, why should my people worry about something that will not happen? Ning-Ke shook his head and said, You believe in Yama. No one dares to kill her. Then the underworld invasion may happen. Why can't you prepare for the possible future? Tang said, If we take you in, the desolate man will be besieged and destroyed by the world before Yama appears. Ning-Ke sneered and said, For 1,000 years, who in the world has shown any kindness to the desolate man? Don't forget that you are still at war. Even without Sang-Sang and me, the countries in the Central Plains will still want to destroy your people. Tang was silent. Ning-Ke said again, Whether we are taken in or not, the desolate man is the enemy of the whole world, and we are also the enemy of the whole world. Don't you think we should live together? Tang said, What good will it do for the desolate man if we take you in? Ning-Ke said with emotion, Sang-Sang and I are good to your sister. Can you not be so materialistic? Tang repeated expressionlessly, What good will it do? Ning-Ke looked a little helpless and then said seriously, If the underworld invasion, the desolate man will have the most fertile land and the most sheep. For the desolate man, fertile land was their life. It was their lifelong goal. Especially after being driven to the cold region of the far north for 1,000 years, it had become an irresistible temptation. There was still no change in Tang's expression. He stared into Ning-Ke's eyes and said, The underworld invasion and the everlasting night will come. The whole world will become extremely cold. No matter how fertile the land is, how can grass grow without sunlight? Without grass, where can sheep come from? Without sheep, how can the desolate man survive? We will all die in the end. Does it matter how big a place we live after death? Is it not important? I have seen many dignitaries spend the rest of their lives thinking about where to live after death and how big the grave should be. I thought this was important and the desolate man would care about it. Well, even if it is not important, I still promise that after the underworld invasion, the desolate man will become the most powerful ghost. Ning-Ke said decisively, I promise that I will make you feel happy even if you become ghosts. Tang said after a moment of silence, I know you are the shame of the academy, but I did not expect you to be so shameless. Ning-Ke thought hard but could not understand it. He asked, why? Tang said, for example, you are very shameless now. Ning-Ke laughed. Tang said, the future is too illusory and does not help in making a choice now. So your promise to the daughter of Yama is meaningless. Ning-Ke said calmly, if you take us in, the desolate man will have a very good warrior like me. Most importantly with me, the academy will not join the war against the desolate man. Hearing this, Tang was silent for a long time. Then he said, that is indeed very good. I admit that I am a little tempted, but the elders may not be willing to take you in. Ning-Ke said, you take us back first. I have a way to persuade them. If you have been in contact with Xiaotang recently, you should know that I am best at deceiving old men. Tang handed over the wine bag and said, then it is settled. Is this a celebratory wine? Ning-Ke took the wine bag and drank a mouthful. This is the first chapter. I will try to finish the second chapter before 11:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 661. Tang led more than 2,000 young and strong desolate man warriors. They had been wandering in the wilderness after winter. Relying on their familiarity with the Tianqi Mountains, they successfully avoided the pursuit of the Left King's Palace and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army until they finally completed a perfect ambush at the canyon. There was no end to revenge. The Left King's Palace and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army would definitely increase their efforts to wipe out the desolate. Tang led the desolate man warriors and began to retreat to the north. There was one more black horse carriage in the team. It was already spring in the Central Plains, but it was still snowing in the north of the wilderness. In the past few years, the desolate man who went south fought continuously with the Left King's Palace and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. In the end, they failed and were forced to retreat thousands of miles north to this bitter cold area. Compared with the frozen hot sea and the cold region of the far north, the climate here was tolerable for the desolate man and could even be considered warm. But for Ning-Ke, especially the seriously ill Sang-Sang, the climate here was a bit harsh. Tang arranged for the two of them to live in a relatively remote animal skin tent. Ning-Ke looked at the camp of the desolate man's tribe, which stretched for more than 10 miles, and asked, when are we going to meet the elders in the Senior Statesman Society? I'll deal with this first. You two wait here for the night. Tang handed over the wine bag tied around his waist. During the more than 10 days back to the north, Ning-Ke was used to drinking this bitter wine made by the desolate man every day. He drank a few mouthfuls and felt that his body was much warmer. Sang-Sang took the wine bag from his hand and sipped it. She looked delicate, but in fact, she did not stop drinking. After a while, the wine bag deflated. At this moment, there was a sudden muffled sound beside her. Ning-Ke did not know why he fell to the ground. Looking at the way he kept smacking his lips, he should be fine and seemed to have fallen asleep. Sang-Sang felt a little strange. Compared to her, Ning-Ke's tolerance for alcohol was extremely poor. But he did not get drunk after drinking so many times. Suddenly, she seemed to think of something and looked up at Tang. Her eyes were very bright and her thin eyebrows were knitted very seriously. For some reason, Tang suddenly felt a little cold when he saw her expression. He laughed at himself and said, I just put some herbal powder to relax his mind and let him have a good sleep. It won't hurt him. Sang-Sang said, he's in good health now. He shouldn't have been poisoned. Tang said, I've been practicing the Enlightenment doctrine since I was a child, so I know his physical condition very well. Moreover, The wine was mixed with medicinal powder, not poison, so he will still fall asleep. I didn't expect this wine to be useless to you. He looked at Sang Sang and asked after a moment of silence, "Are you really Yama's daughter?" Sang Sang nodded. Tang said, "I don't know what the senior statesman's attitude towards your arrival is. I know that Ning Ke is a very dangerous person, so I don't want him to interfere in the internal discussion of the desolate man." "I understand," said Sang Sang. Tang added, "If the elders don't agree to take you in, you will die." Sang Sang said, "We came here to gamble." Dun said, "But this is his gamble." Sang Sang said, "I can accept the result." Dun said nothing more. Snowflakes kept falling into the desolate man's camp. The countless tents that had been filled with laughter and singing became quiet. It was not because of sadness or the hardships of life. The desolate man had long learned to calmly face the death of their clansmen. They had lived a hard life for 1,000 years. The silence was because of the quarrel coming from the tent in the center of the camp, and also because of the black horse carriage parked outside the camp. The tent in the center of the camp was not much different from the other tent. The only difference was that there were dozens of slender ribbons tied to the tent, which added a sense of warmth and mystery. The highest authority of the desolate man's tribe was the senior statesman. Because the matter that was to be discussed today was too important, more than 20 desolate man leaders were also sitting in the field. "Anyway, we're going to fight the people of the Central Plains. It's not a big deal to take in the daughter of Yama. The West Hill Divine Palace hasn't really invested in the past few years. Prince Longqing is just a dog raised by Haotian Taoism. If they know that we have taken in the daughter of Yama, do you think the war will continue like this? By then, the enemies we will face will be 10 times stronger than now. What's the difference between waiting for the Central Plains countries to send more troops and waiting for the West Hill Divine Palace to send more powerhouses into the wilderness? After all, there will be a bloody battle. It has nothing to do with us, no matter how strong they are. Time. The most important thing is time. If there is no daughter of Yama, the Central Plains countries and the West Hill Divine Palace will still want to preserve their strength and let others die in our hands. We can buy time for the women to give birth to more children and let more children become real warriors. If there is no time, we can't hold on. But have you thought about it? Ning Ke promised that as long as we take in the daughter of Yama, the Academy will not participate in this war. If the powerhouses from the second floor of the Academy come to the wilderness, they will be more terrible than the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Ke fled with the daughter of Yama, which is equivalent to betraying the human world. Why would the Academy remain neutral because of him? I don't think his words have any credibility. The most important problem is that we, the desolate, have worshipped Yama for 1,000 years. Now that the daughter of Yama is wandering in the world, but we don't take her in or protect her, what's the point of worshipping her for 1,000 years? We, the desolate, have been worshipping Yama for 1,000 years, but we still live in such a miserable way. Moreover, the underworld invasion will not do us any good. Are we really going to be the vanguard of the underworld? I don't want to be a ghost soldier. The desolate in the tent had completely different opinions on whether to take in Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama. The dispute continued without a conclusion. The first elder and the most powerful Tang remained silent. The two sides were in a deadlock, and even began to influence each other. The old and prudent elders gradually became hot-blooded, while the hot-blooded and impulsive warriors became more worried. But there was still no conclusion. Gradually, more and more people were inclined to kill Ning Ke and Sang Sang for the safety of the desolate tribe. The first elder stood up with difficulty and walked to the table in the middle of the tent. His skinny body, which had been eroded by time and bad environment for many years, seemed to fall apart with just a few shakes. There were some things messily piled up on the wooden table. There were golden leaves, a thick stack of notes, and a few waste tokens. These were all things that Tang found on Ningquebec. The first elder's skinny palm moved slowly on the table and said, "Return these things to the daughter of Yama later. No matter whether we kill or keep them, we must maintain the due respect." Tang calmly agreed and walked to the table, ready to put away the things. The first elder's fingers suddenly trembled like old bamboo in the wind. Tang looked at the direction of the old man's finger. His pupils slightly shrank and his body became a little stiff. After a long silence, he realized that everything was predestined. The first elder glanced at him and sighed, "In that case, let them stay." Tang nodded and said, "I think so too." The elders and the warriors in the tent were very surprised. Even those who were willing to take in Ning Ke and Sang Sang were a little shocked. They did not understand why the first elder and the powerful Tang, who had been silent all the time, suddenly showed their attitude at this time, and it was such a clear and firm attitude. The first elder picked up the thing on the table, and let everyone see it with their own eyes. It was an waste token. It was not made of gold, wood, or stone, and no one knew what it was made of. It was pure white, with a black pattern carved in relief. Looking at the fresh marks on the edge, it seemed to be carved not long ago. The black pattern was a statue. It seemed to be a human, but it also seemed to be some kind of god. The pure white exterior looked like a boundless radiance. Because the person or god had his back to the light, his face and body were immersed in deep shadows, and it was impossible to see clearly. It was quiet in the tent, and the sound of snowflakes falling on the roof became extremely clear. The first elder said slowly, "More than 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light brought the tomes of arcane into the wilderness to preach. We, the desolate, believed in the enlightenment doctrine and worshipped Yama. 1,000 years later, we returned to the south and met the daughter of Yama and the successor of the great divine priest of light. This is probably the so-called fate. In that case, we have to finish this even if our race is exterminated." Tang looked at the warriors and said solemnly, "Back then, I accepted disciples on behalf of my teacher and taught you the Enlightenment Doctrine's cultivation method, so that the inheritance could continue. Now that the inheritance has reappeared, you should know what to do." The warriors knelt on one knee and very respectfully saluted. They answered in unison, "We pledge our lives to serve you." Ning Ke woke up with a headache. At first, he thought it was because of his alcohol tolerance, and felt a little ashamed. Later, he found out that Tang had drugged him, so he became angry. However, when he knew the final decision of the desolate senior statesman, joy and excitement immediately replaced all the negative emotions. However, there were still some things that he could not understand. A few years ago in the wilderness, he had heard from Mo Shanshan that the Devil's Doctrine and the Desolate Man believed in Yama, but they were extremely afraid of Yama's descent into the world. In their teachings, Yama's descent into the world meant the arrival of darkness, and the Desolate Man did not like darkness either. That was why he could understand the Desolate Man's fear and respect for Sang Sang, but they were unwilling to take her in. So what made the Desolate Man suddenly change his attitude and become so positive? In the 18th year of the Tianqi era, there was a strange sign in the sky. There were thick clouds that did not disperse, and the cawing of crows was unpleasant. It started from the Ueluan kingdom, passed through the swamp, passed the Tang border, crossed the Helan, and arrived at the eastern wilderness before continuing north. The whole world knew that Ning Ke had brought Sang Sang, the daughter of Yama, into the Desolate Man's tribe. The West Hill Divine Palace sent a letter to the senior statesman of the Desolate Man's tribe, ordering them to kill or hand over the Yama maiden immediately. In return, the West Hill Divine Palace promised to stop attacking the Desolate Man and open up a large pasture in the eastern wilderness to help the Desolate Man rebuild their country. The senior statesman of the Desolate calmly and firmly rejected the request of the West Hill Divine Palace. The West Hill Divine Palace announced to the world that all cultivators were to enter the wilderness. There was already a steady flow of provisions into the wilderness, and all countries began to recruit soldiers. The West Hill Divine Palace said in the rescript that this was no longer just a war against the desolate man, but a holy war to save the world. The real war was about to begin. Try to finish the next chapter before 2 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 662. In the 18th year of Tianqi era, the war between the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army and the Desolate broke out. There was no foreshadowing, no negotiation, and no probing. Hundreds of thousands of troops from both sides began to fight on the wilderness. Countless people died every moment. Those cultivators, who were usually aloof and arrogant, fought desperately like ordinary soldiers on the storm-like battlefield. Even the strong men in the see-through realm could become nameless corpses in the grass at any time. The West Hill Divine Palace, which had been low-key in the past few years, finally showed the demeanor and majesty of ruling the world. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace led the two great divine priests of revelation and judgment, as well as the powerful cavalrymen of the divine halls to the wilderness. The Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom, Crown Prince Chongming of the Yen Kingdom, and the kings of the Central Plains all came to their senses after the shock. They gathered their troops as quickly as possible and personally led their troops into the wilderness to fight. A few days later, another shocking news came from Chang'an. The Tang Emperor, Li Zhongyi, had led the Tang cavalrymen into the wilderness more than 10 days ago and was about to arrive at Helan City. It was not until then that the billions of Haotian believers in the world finally realized that the underworld invasion was not just a legend. Otherwise, why would the major powers in the world be so nervous and gather such a terrifying army into the wilderness just because of the daughter of Yama? The Tang Empire had more than 100,000 troops in the wilderness. The northeast border military had all left Tuyang City. Under the leadership of General Xian Zhilong, they went straight to the north along the Yen border. It only took them a short time to reach the main battlefield in the depths of the wilderness and join the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Although the Tang Empire's most powerful northern army was responsible for monitoring and intimidating the Golden Palace, they still sent more than half of their troops to Helan City with the Emperor's entourage. I wonder how many soldiers will return to the Tang Empire after this war. The Tang Emperor, Li Zhongyi, stood on the eastern city wall of Helan City. He looked at the northern army cavalrymen at the bottom of the valley who were marching eastward. He looked calm but deeply emotional. Master Huang Yang stood beside the emperor, silently chanting with his palms pressed together. The Helan general, Han Qing, stood behind the emperor. He thought that he was the emperor's most loyal servant, so he should say many things that other officials and generals found inconvenient. Your Majesty, it is true that you can show the military power by leading the army. But it is too dangerous to go far away from the country. Especially since the nation master cannot accompany us and the academy did not send anyone. The emperor waved his hand and stopped Han Qing's remonstrance. He said, "The memorials in the court came like snowflakes. The 4 generals, led by Su Shi, wanted to write a letter in blood. They just didn't want me to leave Chang'an. If I hadn't seen the opportunity and left a few days earlier, I'm afraid some officials would have hit the palace wall. Now I've listened to your advice and stayed in Helan City instead of advancing eastward. Are you still not satisfied?" Han Qing was not in the mood to be proud. He thought of the fierce battlefield hundreds of miles away from the east of the valley and the powerful cultivators who were so close to His Majesty. He said in a trembling voice, "I still think that Your Majesty should return to the northern military camp even if you want to take command of the army." Han Qing was half a barbarian. If he did not have the emperor's trust, it would be difficult for him to reach such a high position in the Tang army. So he was most afraid of being called a barbarian. But His Majesty was different. He called Han Qing barbarian out of habit. Han Qing only felt close and proud. The emperor was slightly annoyed and said, I have let you guard Helan City for so many years. Do you still think that Helan City cannot be defended? Han Qing was shocked and said in a low voice, Helan City is impregnable. But Your Majesty, there are many powerful cultivators in the wilderness. The Emperor said, the desolate man's cultivators have to deal with the bigwigs in the West Hill Divine Palace. They are all miserable. How can they have the energy to assassinate me? There was no one else on the city wall. Han Qing glanced at Master Huang Yang and said in a low voice after a moment of struggle, Your Majesty, I am worried about the bigwigs in the Divine Hall. At this time, the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace had come to the eastern wilderness. There were also the two great divine priests of revelation and judgment, as well as the visiting professors hidden by Hautian Taoism in various countries. This lineup was more than luxurious. It was the most magnificent lineup in the past 100 years. No other place could have such a lineup except the Academy. His Majesty was slightly startled and then laughed out loud. He said, Hautian Taoism has always disliked the Tang Empire. Now that I rarely leave Chang'an, it is hard to say whether they will have any ideas. Your worry is reasonable. But I don't believe that the bigwigs in the Divine Hall would really dare to harm me. Han Qing could not help but feel bitter when he heard the heroic tone in His Majesty's words. He knew that it was hard to persuade the Tangs when it came to courage. But he was still not reconciled. He said, half of the northern army has been transferred to the eastern wilderness. What if the Golden Tribe is not stable? Your Majesty should go to the northern military camp. His Majesty slightly frowned and said, with Su Qi in the northern military camp, what should I worry about? Su Qi was one of the 4 great generals of the Tang Empire. He had always been calm and low-key. He was not as famous as the Defender General of the state Su Shi or the Defender General Xia Ho. But this general's defense was unparalleled. He had been in charge of the Northern Army because the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court wanted to maintain peace. Han Qing could not slander General Su Qi's ability. He could not help sweating anxiously. The Emperor looked at his dispirited expression and could not help laughing. He waved his hand to dismiss him. The sun was setting in the west, shining on Helan City. The eastern city wall was slightly dark. The Tang cavalry had all passed through the gorge to the eastern wilderness, but His Majesty was still standing on the city wall. He held the railing and looked into the distance thoughtfully. His hair had turned white, but his face did not show any signs of aging. He was just much thinner than before. The wilderness was much colder than Chang'an. There was no sunlight at this time. The wild wind blew through the gorge. His Majesty slightly frowned and raised his fist to his lips to suppress his coughing. Then he took out a bottle of elixir and swallowed one. Cough suppressant can only treat the symptoms but not the root cause. It is not good for your body if you take too much. Master Huang Yang looked at him and said worriedly. He and His Majesty had known each other for many years. After returning from Xiankong Temple, they became sworn brothers. So he spoke and acted very directly, unlike ordinary officials. His Majesty smiled and said, after so many years, I still can't cure the root cause. Then I will make myself comfortable. Huang Yang asked, Your Majesty, are you really not worried? His Majesty slightly frowned and said, Worried about what? That Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court or those charlatans of the West Hill Divine Palace. I have more than 100,000 cavalrymen outside. I don't believe that the Golden Palace dares to come. Huang Yang looked at His Majesty's calm and confident expression and could not help smiling. He thought that he had forgotten that His Majesty was once an invincible general in the northern borderline when he was the crown prince. The Golden Palace had suffered a lot in his hands and would not dare to challenge him. But the Emperor guessed that he was worried about the same as Han Qing. He shook his head and said, If the West Hill Divine Palace wants me dead, they must attack with all their strength. But now their target is the desolate man and the daughter of Yama. Moreover, they would not dare to assassinate me. After a moment of silence, Huang Yang said, "In fact, I am more worried about Chang'an." His Majesty slightly frowned and asked, "Do you think it is inappropriate for the princess to supervise the country?" Huang Yang thought that it was not only him who thought it was inappropriate for the princess to supervise the country. Countless officials of the Tang Empire, and even the people on the streets, thought it was inappropriate. His Majesty had traveled to the wilderness and brought those two with him. If anything happened, Chang'an would be in turmoil. Without waiting for his reply, His Majesty said indifferently, "I know what you are worried about. Those worries are meaningless. Even if something really happened to me, who would dare to disobey the edict?" Master Huang Yang calmly said, "The edict is only effective if it is seen by people." His Majesty said, "If I die first, who would dare to do such a rebellious thing as the headmaster of the academy and the headmaster of the academy? Han Qing is worried about my safety, and you are worried about the safety of the country. That is because you have not figured out one thing. If you want to destroy the Tang Empire, you must first kill the headmaster of the academy, then kill me, and then destroy the entire academy. But in this world, who can do that?" Huang Yang slowly shook his head and said, "But the headmaster of the academy is old after all." "The headmaster of the academy will never be old." His Majesty obviously had the second half of his sentence. But for some reason, perhaps because he was touched, he slowly said after a moment of silence, "In fact, I am really old." Huang Yang knew that His Majesty had always been in poor health. He understood that what he meant by old was actually an illness. He could not help but feel a little depressed. But then he thought that life and death were common things and there was no need to worry about it. Knowing that Huang Yang had thought it through, His Majesty laughed and reached out to touch his bald head. This was something he was used to doing many years ago. But Master Huang Yang had not been touched so disrespectfully for many years, so he could not get used to it. His appearance of a high monk suddenly disappeared, and he angrily stared at the Emperor. The Emperor's smile gradually disappeared. He looked at him and calmly said, "Worrying about life and death is futile. But the affairs after death need to be arranged in advance. I have already thought about it. I will pass the throne to Xiaolu." The angry expression on Huang Yang's face suddenly froze. After a long time, he came to his senses and said in surprise, "How can such an important matter be decided so casually? And why did your Majesty let me know first?" The Emperor said, "Weren't you worried about the effect of the edict? You are the executor of the edict." Huang Yang said bitterly, "I don't have this ability. This should be the Academy's business." The Emperor shook his head and said, "The Academy is not allowed to interfere in the court affairs. This is the iron rule set by the headmaster of the Academy. There was Ning Ke originally. I wanted him to carry out my edict. But now he is fighting against the whole world and even me for his wife. How can I still use him?" Huang Yang thought of that rumor and frowned even more. He looked at the back of the tower. The Emperor knew what he was thinking and calmly said, "I heard that Professor Yu Lian of the Academy took in a female disciple the year before last." Huang Yang said, "Yes. It is said that she is the younger sister of Wayfarer Tang of the Devil's Doctrine." The Emperor looked at him and said, "The Academy does not care about it. I do not care. The Tang Empire does not need to care either. As for your and Qingshan's worries, I will let Xiaolu become Mr. First's disciple after returning to Chang'an." Huang Yang put his palms together and sincerely praised, "Then there will be no problem." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 663. Huang Yang asked, "But I still don't understand why your Majesty wants to lead the army in person." In the eyes of the people, the officials, you and Qingshan, there must be a lot of hidden thoughts. Many people are guessing, but it is actually for a very simple reason. The Emperor laughed and said, I have been the emperor for more than 10 years and have lived in Chang'an for more than 10 years. I have missed too many things in the world. If the underworld really invades from the north, it must be the most spectacular scene in thousands of years. I certainly don't want to miss it." Hearing this, Huang Yang laughed and then sighed helplessly. He thought that His Majesty was indeed such a person. When he was about to ask more questions, he heard footsteps behind him. The Empress walked out of the tower holding a little boy and whispered something from time to time. When her eyes fell on the little boy, she seemed so gentle and satisfied. The Emperor went to greet them. The little boy was wearing bright yellow clothes. He had inherited the advantages of his parent. He was handsome, but he looked a little timid. It was not because he had inherited his parents' temperament, but because he was influenced by them. But from the childish smile on his face, it could be seen that he liked to be with his parents. Huang Yang looked at the happy family of 3 and smiled. He looked out of the city gate tower and saw the setting sun shining on the wilderness. The valley was dark and gloomy, but the chill in the wind was no longer bone-piercing. It seemed that summer was coming. In a side hall of the imperial palace in Chang'an, Liu looked at the young man who was writing with a brush. Her expression was so gentle and satisfied. The former young prince, Li Huiyuan, had entered the stage of his youth. Compared with a few years ago, he looked a little thinner and more handsome. There was a heroic and calm air in his eyes. Li Huiyuan had become quieter than before in the past 2 years. It seemed that he had a lot of ideas. Liu thought it was not a bad thing. On the contrary, she thought it was good. She felt that she could finally live up to her dead mother. At this moment, she was no longer the most powerful princess of the Tang Empire. She was just a sister. His Majesty personally led the army to the wilderness, and she was appointed to supervise the country. Every day, she was responsible for dealing with memorials in the main hall. It seemed that she should be very busy, but in fact, she was not. The Tang Empire had its own rules. Most of the things were decided by the Prime Minister and various ministers. She was more like a monitor and occasionally a judge. Liu knew very well that at times like this, the calmer she should be, so she calmly carried out the task of supervising the country and received praise from many ministers in the court. Most of the rest of the time, she spent it on seemingly casual exchanges with the ministers and other matters. "Sister, what do you think of my handwriting?" Li Huiyuan presented the newly written scroll to Liu as if presenting a treasure. He said proudly, "The teachers of the imperial school all said that I wrote well. My father will definitely like it." Liu praised him, then looked at him and said, "Even if my father likes calligraphy, you should not use the post road to send letters. Now that the war is about to start, be careful of affecting the post road. How much effort can a piece of paper take?" Li Huiyuan said carelessly, "I want to open the transmission array in the palace to send a letter to my father, but no one will agree. My father likes calligraphy, but he cares more about the future of the Tang Empire. The transmission array is so important that it consumes a lot of energy to open it. How can he let you fool around?" Liu said coldly. Then she seemed to think of something and looked a little sad. She said softly, "You see, Ning Ke was favored by my father, but now he has become an abandoned person." Li Huiyuan said, "We are my father's children. How can Ning Ke be compared to us?" Liu did not answer. She looked at her brother and said sternly, "Now Ning Ke can't be counted on, and the academy can't stand out to support us. It seems that the situation is good now. You and I have to be more careful." Seeing her serious expression, Li Huiyuan's heart trembled slightly. He hurriedly agreed, but there was an obvious look of disapproval in his eyes. He slightly raised the corner of his mouth, as if he had confidence that even Liu did not have. "I plan to go to the south gate to see the nation master," he said. Liu frowned slightly. She had been wondering why the nation master, who had been on good terms with the empress all these years, began to support her and her brother after Ning Ke passed by Qinghe Prefecture on his way to the Lank Temple. The nation master of the Tang Empire, Li Qingshan, could at least influence half of the Southern Gate Temple and the Imperial Center administration. No matter how she looked at it, the change in his attitude was excellent news for Li Yu and her brother. She said, "The nation master is seriously ill and bedridden. It's not convenient for me to leave the palace. You should visit him more often." In the 17th year of the Tianqi era, there were endless funerals in Chang'an. It was difficult to remove the white banners. Many elders of the three dynasties and important ministers of the old days could not withstand the invasion of time and left the world sadly. Defender General of the state Su Shi and the nation master of the Tang Empire, Li Qingshan, were also seriously ill, which made many people feel uneasy. "I have been cultivating all my life, but I haven't made much progress in other aspects. I can be the nation master of the Tang Empire because His Majesty gave me face in the past. The only thing I am proud of is the method of deduction with the chessboard." The dark floor of the Southern Gate Temple was covered with thick bedding. Li Qingshan lay on the soft bedding and looked at the spring scenery outside the window. He smiled faintly and said to He Mingqi, who was by the window, "I have always been a little dissatisfied with the great divine priest of revelation and even thought that Elder Qishan was just so. Until now, I understand that God's will is unpredictable. Those two are far more intelligent than me and can see much more clearly than I can. I forced myself to use the chessboard to deduce the future, so I vomited more blood and became weaker. Haotian's favor gradually faded, so it is normal for me to die early." He Mingqi looked a little sad, but he did not know what to say. His Majesty led the army into the wilderness. Logically speaking, Li Qingshan, as the nation master of the Tang Empire, should accompany the emperor. However, because of his serious illness, he stayed in Chang'an and was replaced by the emperor's younger brother, Master Huang Yang. "I am not worried about my life. Monk Huang Yang is with His Majesty and there are so many powerhouses in the army, so I am not worried about His Majesty's safety. I am worried about something else." The smile on Li Qingshan's face gradually disappeared, and he looked a little tired. He said, "His Majesty took the Empress and little Six to Helan City this time, but left the princess in Chang'an City to supervise the state. Many ministers and even the people of Chang'an think that His Majesty is going to pass the throne to Li Huiyuan." After a short pause, he continued, "But who knows His Majesty better than me? His Majesty is not the kind of ambitious and ruthless monarch who relies on the so-called strategy to rule the country. His Majesty is a true hero with a heroic spirit. If he has decided to pass the throne to someone, he will definitely announce it to the world. He will definitely not probe or use this kind of method, because this kind of method is too petty. He is unwilling and disdainful of using it." Hearing this, He Mingqi's body slightly stiffened, and he asked in a low voice, "Master, what are you worried about?" Li Qingshan looked at the thick green leaves outside the window and thought of the coming summer. He said slowly, "I am worried that this is an empty joy, and it is easy to have problems after an empty joy." At this time, a voice came from outside the temple. He Mingqi got up and went forward. After a while, he walked into the temple with Prince Li Huiyuan and said gently, "Master, the prince is here to see you." Li Qingshan looked at Li Huiyuan's face, which was becoming more and more like His Majesty's, and his heart was slightly warm. After Li Huiyuan's visit, he returned to the palace. He Mingqi received the master's order to go to the palace, so he followed him in the sedan chair. The Southern Gate Temple was very close to the palace, so they could not talk for a long time. It was very dark in the sedan chair, and Li Huiyuan's handsome eyes looked a bit blurred. He looked at He Mingqi, who was sitting opposite him silently, and said after a moment of silence, "Mr. He told me about that the year before last. Later, I sent people to investigate for a long time, but they found no evidence." He Mingshi smiled and did not say anything, but he still looked at Li Huiyuan's eyes. It was not that he did not want to discuss this issue, but that he wanted to hear Li Huiyuan's explanation more clearly. A little annoyance appeared in Li Huiyuan's eyes, and he asked, "The Empress is really the saintess of diabolism?" He Mingshi wanted to hear this direct and clear answer, so he nodded and said, "Although there is no evidence, my master knows about it, and the Academy should also know about it, and they can find evidence. I know what your Highness is thinking. The Southern Gate Temple has been worshipping Haotian for generations, and they certainly do not want the son of the Saintess of Diabolism to become the Tang Emperor." Hearing this, Li Huiyuan suddenly relaxed, and his eyes showed joy and excitement. He rubbed his hands nervously and said with some annoyance and helplessness, "Why does the nation master still not reveal the true identity of the demoness? Because His Majesty will not agree." He Mingshi looked at him and said calmly, "Your Highness, please remember that no matter how powerful a weapon is, it can only be used at the right moment. So please pretend that you don't know anything about it, and don't tell anyone, including the princess." Li Huiyuan frowned slightly and wanted to say something, but they had arrived at the imperial palace. He Mingshi followed him into the palace, and first went to see Li Yu. He said a few words, and then walked to somewhere in the palace. These years, he often went to the palace with the nation master, so he could come and go as he pleased. Moreover, the eunuchs and maids knew that this Taoist official of the Southern Gate Temple was respected by the princess and the prince, so no one stopped him. After a while, he walked to a small building in the depths of the imperial garden. He reached out and separated the dense green branches outside the building, stepped over the wildflowers and weeds that no one cared about, and walked into the small building. Following the dark passage at the bottom of the small building, He Mingshi walked down to the empty underground hall. He looked around and saw the luminous pearls hanging in the air like stars, illuminating the whole space. He knew what the underground hall was, and what was needed to activate it. But Ning Ke might have given the Array Pestle to the Academy for safekeeping, and neither he nor the nation master could do anything about it. Standing on the empty ground, He Mingshi imagined the scene after the array was activated. He slowly closed his eyes and opened his arms, as if he was standing under the night sky, embracing the whole world. The next chapter will be out before 12 o'clock. It will be shorter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 664. He Mingshi was standing on the array eye of the God-stunning array. In other words, it was the array eye of the God-stunning array. That was why he felt that he could embrace the whole world if he opened his arms. However, it only took him a short time to wake up from this feeling. Earlier, when he had passed through the deep passageway, he should have been killed by the runes carved on the stone walls of the passageway. Other than the Emperor, who had the Great Seal, and the person in charge of the array eye, no one else could enter this place. He Mingshi naturally had his own way to come here. He had told Prince Li Huiyuan that no matter how powerful a weapon was, it could only be used at the right time. Now, standing in the most powerful array eye of the God-stunning array, he thought that no matter how powerful a weapon was, it could only be used if it was in the right hands. There was only one true God in the world, Haotian. The name of the array eye of Chang An was a blasphemy to Haotian. He Mingshi thought that the only meaning of the array eye was to destroy it. It was late spring. Even the northernmost part of the wilderness was warm. The forest was turning green and the grass was growing. However, it would only be green when summer came. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been living in the desolate man's tribe for a long time. In these days, apart from taking care of Sang Sang, the most important thing he did was to write talismans and cultivate the great spirit and bladesmanship. Behind the desolate man's tribe, tens of thousands of powerful desolate man soldiers were fighting in the south. Even the powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects could not threaten him and Sangsang. But Ning Ke knew that the desolate man could not win this war. Besides, he was not used to leaving his life in the hands of the outside world. Therefore, he cultivated even harder. The dry branch gently scratched the freshly defrosted soil, squeezing out mud and leaving a deep mark. It looked no different from writing on paper with a brush. It was the word too. Ning Ke looked at the word quietly. He picked up the branch and wrote another word. In a short period of time, he had written at least 30 words. Each word was different and had its own meaning. His writing became more and more illegible until the last few words seemed to be connected. However, he was still not satisfied. He felt that the connection was wrong. He did not know what was wrong, but he was sure it was wrong. He silently looked at the strokes on the ground, his brows slightly furrowed, appearing extremely serious. Time to eat. A desolate man-woman wearing a hat and animal skin cotton-padded clothes walked behind him and whispered. Ning Ke came to his senses and followed the desolate woman to the tent. Coincidentally, the desolate woman sent by the desolate senior statesman to serve them was the same one he and Mo Shanshan met when they entered the wilderness a few years ago. However, the desolate boy who participated in the winter ceremony had already become a warrior and was not in the tribe. The desolate men worshipped Yama and feared him. Therefore, they were in awe of Sangsang. At least 90% of them were absolutely afraid of her. The desolate woman was no exception. In particular, the dark clouds and a dozen black crows that came with Sangsang made the old, weak, women and children in the tribe even more afraid. They could often see people kowtowing to the sky and the black crows on Sangsang's tent. The desolate woman did not even dare to return to her own tent at first. It was not until she saw it for a long time that she became a little used to it. Today's lunch was meat soup and pancakes. There was a lot of meat in the meat soup, which was probably more than the meat in the bowls of all the women and children in the tribe. As for the pancakes, only Ning Ke and Sangsang had such treatment. The mutton soup was very stewed. The soup was milky white and exuded a natural fragrance. Ning Ke scooped a bowl of soup and took 2 pancakes. He signaled the desolate woman to eat the rest or share it with the neighbors. Then he walked into the tent and helped Sangsang, who had just woken up. He tore the pancakes and soaked them in the soup and fed her. Sangsang's little face was no longer as pale as it was during the escape. She returned to her usual dark complexion, but she did not get better. Instead, she became heavier and had no appetite. She shook her head and said, "No." "Then drink a few more mouthfuls of soup." Ning Ke brought the soup bowl to her lips and carefully fed her. Sangsang suddenly coughed. It was not because she was choking on the soup. She had been coughing very badly these days. The coughing echoed in the tent for a long time. She looked very painful. Ning Ke's lapel was full of the soup she coughed out. The milky soup mixed with the blood she coughed out turned black. Ning Ke held her in his arms and gently stroked her back. He kissed her forehead and whispered something. He seemed to be humming a song. Sangsang gradually calmed down and breathed steadily. Then she gradually fell asleep. The fire talisman in the clay pot helped to ignite the firewood. The temperature in the tent suddenly rose, and then quickly dimmed down when it was suppressed by the cold air. It was still as cold as the underworld. Ning Ke withdrew his fingers and looked at the frost on the edge of the brazier. He was silent for a long time. Then he reached into the quilt and held Sangsang's cold little feet. He kept rubbing them. He didn't get up until her feet were warm. He took off his coat that was stained with blood and changed his underwear that was soaked with sweat and frozen into ice by the cold air. Then he walked out of the tent. He looked up at the dark clouds. Facing the penetrating sunlight, the frost on his eyelashes gradually melted into water. Sangsang's illness was getting worse. Neither the Haotian divine light cultivated by Haotian Taoism nor the Buddha's breath comprehended by Buddhism could suppress or pacify the cold aura. More and more coldness seeped out of her small body. No matter if it was the strong wine or the seal fire, it was difficult for her to feel warm. The bedding and clothes were as cold as ice, and the entire tent was as cold as an icehouse. The desolate woman had found another tent to live in 10 days ago. The field was green in spring, but the ground around his and Song Song's tent was still frozen, like another world. What worried Ning Ke the most now was Song Song's illness. If there was no way to cure Song Song's illness, it would be meaningless even if the Desolate could defeat the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army. Even if he could be invincible. That was why he kept cultivating and learning. Part of the reason was to make himself stronger. More importantly, he wanted to find a way to eliminate the cold aura in Song Song's body by reading the Buddha's note. Also, because the Desolate Man had the tradition of worshipping Yama, he learned a lot about it. In the Desolate's sacrificial ceremony, Yama's full name was Immortal Guang Ming. He always felt that he had seen it in the Buddha's notes or some Taoist classic. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find it. Just like that, spring gradually came, spring gradually left, and summer gradually came. Song Song's body and Ning Ke's mood kept walking into the cold winter, and were gradually covered by ice and snow. That's all for today. I'll write a detailed outline and write 3 chapters tomorrow. Then I'll recommend Jin Xuanzhe's new book, Doomsday Show, book number 2524045. I believe everyone is very familiar with Jin Xuanzhe, so I won't boast about him here. Say something for myself. I'm very grateful to you, and I'll work hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 665. There was no good news in the south, only bad news. Every once in a while, a list would be sent back to the tribe from the battlefield. Each name on the list represented a dead, desolate man soldier. The desolate man was simple and firm, very similar to the Tangs. No matter what difficulties they faced, they could be silent, but they would not be depressed. Even if the situation was harsh, the women would occasionally sing songs while washing clothes or hunting. As time passed, the war in the south became more and more brutal. The frequency of the list being sent back was getting slower and slower, but the length was getting longer and longer. The old, weak, women and children who stayed in the tribe were no longer in the mood to sing. The entire field became quieter and the atmosphere more and more depressing. Every night, faint cries could be heard. No matter how strong a desolate woman was, she could not hold back her sadness when she saw her son's name on the list. One day, the desolate woman who was responsible for taking care of Ning Ke and Sang Sang finally saw her son's name on the list. She began to cry, and the women nearby gathered around to comfort her. Ning Ke put down the heavy curtain of the tent and walked back to the bed to continue feeding Sang Sang medicine. Sang Sang stopped after 2 sips. She looked up at him and said, "What's the point of hiding here? I'm going to die eventually. Don't feel guilty. The desolate man is like us. We are not tolerated in the world. Even if they did not take us in, the West Hill Divine Palace and the countries in the Central Plains would not allow them to continue living." Ning Ke said. Sang Sang shook her head gently and said, "But if we did not come, they would not die so quickly." After saying this, she opened her palm and looked at the black chess piece in her palm in a daze. This chess piece was the only one she had played in the last game of chess in the Lank Temple. More and more people died in the tribe, and she became more and more ill. The tent became colder and colder, and everything was covered with a thin layer of frost. Only the black chess piece in her hand was still warm. Ning Ke held her in his arms and said, "Don't worry. Even if the desolate man cannot hold on, we can still go to the north. We can go to the scenery of the hot sea." Eldest brother said that although the sea is frozen, if we can break the ice, we can still find a few peony fish. The old yellow ox loves it, so it should taste good. Sang Sang said, "You know I am not worried about this." Ning Ke was silent. Sang Sang said in a low voice, "From the Lank Temple to the Xiankong Temple, from the wilderness to Chaoyang City, then to the wilderness and finally here. I'm really tired. Ning Ke wanted to say something but was stopped by her. You said something to me in Chaoyang City, said Sang Sang. You said that the future is actually very similar to death. If it's already destined, then there's no point in worrying about it. If it can be changed, then there's even less need for us to worry. We just need to work hard to change it. Ning Ke said, This is what the headmaster said. Sang Sang said, The world is big, but there is really no place where I can live. We all know that the ending can't be changed, so why are we still worried? Death means that there is no future. When we can't change it, shouldn't we learn to accept it? Ning Ke said with a smile, That's very well said. Sang Sang lowered her head shyly. Ning Ke said, I didn't expect Sang Sang to have the demeanor of a noble family now. Sang Sang said, I'm just a little handmaiden. Ning Ke said, Let's not mention that Grand Secretary Xing Jing is the biological father of this body. You are the eldest daughter of the Yama family. Who in the world can be more noble than you? Sang Sang didn't continue Ning Ke's joke, because she knew that he said it to change the topic. She said, I don't want to continue hiding. Ning Ke was silent for a long time and asked, Why? Do you feel uneasy? Or do you feel like a rat crossing the street by hiding like this? I told you when you were young that as long as you can live, you should do whatever you want, no matter if you are a rat that everyone wants to kill or a poisonous snake that everyone fears. Sang Sang said, I know that I can't live for a long time. In that case, why would I want to be a rat or a poisonous snake? If this is an uneasy conscience, then it is. Maybe we are destined to live such a hard life. What's destined? Lucky chance? The headmaster said that I am his lucky chance. Then what is my lucky chance? Your lucky chance is of course me. Don't joke. I don't know why, but I always feel that I should go to the south at this time. You will die if you go to the south. You will die if you don't go. That makes sense. Ning Ke was actually very clear that if Sang Sang appeared on the battlefield in the southern wilderness at this time, the most likely thing that would happen to her was not necessarily death, but probably something more terrible than death. He said, It is said that you live lively and die alone. If you really want to die, you should indeed have a grand and lively ceremony. And if you go to the road of death, you may find a chance to live. Seeing that he agreed to her suggestion, Sang Sang laughed happily. Although she did not know the specific situation on the battlefield in the south, she could clearly feel from the atmosphere in the desolate man's tribe that the situation they were facing was getting more and more serious. Even the women in the tribe had begun to prepare leather armor and weapons, ready to join the battle at any time. According to Ning Ke's original plan, he would use the desolate man's tribe to block the Central Plains Coalition army for a period of time and see if Sang Sang's illness could get better. Then he would take Sang Sang to the cold region of the far north. Even if he had to be a savage by the hot sea, he could not let them be caught by the powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects. However, Sang Sang's illness did not get better. Instead, it became more and more serious. Especially when Sang Sang did not want to continue fleeing, then everything would be for naught. After making the decision, Sang Sang's spirit became slightly better, not knowing if it was because her spirit finally had a place to rest. She was not as lethargic and sleepy as before. The cold aura in her body was getting stronger and stronger, but she had some appetite. She only put down the bowl of meat porridge after eating more than half of it. Ning Ke boiled a large pot of hot water and bathed her. Sang Sang sat in the big pot, her body overflowing with cold aura. The firewood under the pot continued to burn, and Ning Ke added a fire talisman to ensure that the flame would not go out. If someone were to see this, they would definitely think that I am going to stew you and eat you. Ning Ke rubbed her hair and said with a smile. Sang Sang smiled a little naively and said, Smelly, not delicious. Ning Ke said, My Sang Sang is the sweetest and most delicious. Sang Sang said, But I haven't seen you really eat me. Ning Ke said with a smile. Who asked you to always be so disappointing and always be sick? Sang Sang raised her head and looked at him with wide eyes. She said seriously, if you don't eat now, you really won't be able to. Ning Ke pressed her head down and said, it's not like you don't know that I don't like to eat meat. Sang Sang felt wronged and said, when we were young in the city of Wei, you ate all the meat. In Chang'an, you liked to stay by Sister Dewdrop's side. How can I tell that you don't like it? Ning Ke was speechless and could only keep quiet. He picked up the towel and wrapped her up, carried her to the bed, and then carefully wiped the water that had condensed into ice beads on her body. Then, he took out the Chinjinji Cosmetic Store's powder and applied it evenly on her face. Sang Sang looked at her pale face in the mirror and sighed, I used to think that I was born dark, but then I became whiter and whiter after I got sick. Now I'm even darker. It's so troublesome. After applying the powder for her, Ning Ke began to draw her eyebrows. He said casually, my Sang Sang can be black and white when she wants to be. She's really a little beauty who can look good with light or heavy makeup. Sang Sang said, Ning Ke, you are getting more and more shameless now. You can tell such a big lie without changing your expression. Ning Ke looked at the clean little face in front of him. He looked at her eyebrows that were as black as ink and her short hair that was like grass leaf. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead, and then kissed her cool lip. He said, you have always been beautiful. Sang Sang was a little shy, but she looked at him bravely and kissed him back. Ning Ke smiled and helped her put on her underwear. He stuck the fire talisman on her and put on a few thick cotton coat. He whistled to the outside of the tent and looked at her quietly. He asked, are we leaving now? Sang Sang nodded and said, yes. Ning Ke said, then let's go. They did not need any reason to leave. They just did not want to stay. Ning Ke and Sang Sang refused the desolate man's strong persuasion and even obstruction. They drove the black horse carriage to the south. They came here with so much difficulty and left so suddenly. It was just like when they waited for eldest brother in Chaoyang City for a whole winter and then parted when they saw each other. This behavior seemed a little ridiculous and almost like a child's play. But in fact, it was a helpless choice under an absolute predicament. It was fake elegance. Underneath it was cold despair. No matter how big the world was, there was no place for them to stay. There was no direction and no end to escape, so it was meaningless. Sang Sang, who was seriously ill and on the verge of death, did not want to escape anymore. So Ning Ke did not escape either. So they went to the battlefield in the south with cold air. It was at the moment when they decided not to escape that they regained the meaning of freedom in the remaining time they had left in the human world. They were forced to flee for their lives over the past few days, and they were also forced to leave. In the war between light and darkness, everything they did was forced. Only at this moment, peacefully dying was the choice they made on their own initiative, because only death, which represented eternity, was higher than light and darkness. Sang Sang had already seen her ending and knew that she could not escape, so she was very calm. Ning Ke understood these things and saw through the truth. Or rather, he no longer held any hope for Sang Sang's illness. So he was no longer afraid or sad, and also began to calm down. The big black horse could not calm down. Its hooves stepped on the grass, and its nose smelled the fragrance of wildflowers. Its butt was padded with a few thick pieces of animal skin, but it could not stop the cold air in the carriage. It had long lost feeling between its legs from the cold, and it was very frightened and uneasy. The black horse carriage left the desolate man's tribe. The thick dark clouds in the sky gradually moved, shrouding the wilderness in late spring, and darkening the grass on the field. More than 10 black crows flew south with the carriage. They did not know if it was because the cold air in Sang Sang's body was getting more and more serious, so the temperature of the air had dropped a lot, and they became much quieter. I took advantage of yesterday's vacation to have a good sleep and adjusted my biological clock. I hope I can last longer this time. It's best if I can keep going. It's just that it's too easy to get sleepy when writing during the day. There will be updates at night, and please don't forget that there will be updates tomorrow. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 666. The black carriage traveled through the wilderness, and jackdaws flew in the dark grass. In the distant wilderness in front of them, sword lights occasionally flashed by, and chaotic clouds gradually broke into pieces. Ning-Ke sensed the faint fluctuation of aura and put the fruit in front of Song-Song's lips. He said, "I have never seen such a violent fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth. I wonder how many powerhouses are fighting there." In the White Tower Temple in Chaoyang City of Yueluan Kingdom, he had seen the battle between eldest brother and the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple. In that battle, eldest brother used the words of Confucius against the words of Buddha of the chief preaching monk. Both of them displayed a state that was almost miraculous. It was no weaker than the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth coming from the distant wilderness. However, neither eldest brother nor the chief preaching monk fought to the death that day. At this time, the storm-like change of the qi of heaven and earth that Ning-Ke sensed was even more terrifying and shocking. "I've seen it." Sang-Sang took the fruit and took a bite. The color of the flesh changed slightly and was instantly frozen. When she chewed, there was a rustling sound as if she was chewing on ice. Ning-Ke asked curiously, "Where have you seen such a battle?" Sang-Sang said, "When the headmaster and Master Yen Sei fought on the north mountain of Chang'an, the change of the qi of heaven and earth was also terrible. But they covered it themselves at that time." Ning-Ke took the frozen fruit and took a bite. His teeth didn't break, but he shivered because of the cold. He said with a smile, "If we were still in Chang'an, the neighbors on Lin 47th Street would no longer buy ice to pour well water on during the summer. They would stay in the old brush pen shop every day." Sang-Sang smiled and then coughed twice. Since leaving the desolate man's tribe, she coughed less often. Maybe because she coughed too much in the past 2 years, she only coughed out a pure cold aura without phlegm or black blood. Sang-Sang was very clean now. There was no dirty blood, sweat, or saliva. Her body was extremely pure inside and out, like transparent glass. In other words, she was becoming less and less like a human. Ning-Ke held her in his arms and kissed her. Then he put his hand into her black fur coat and rubbed it. Although it was very cold, it was still very soft and warm. "I never thought that I would marry a fairy," he said. Sang-Sang looked up at him, flicked the frost off his eyelashes, and corrected him seriously, "I'm not a fairy, I'm a monster." Ning-Ke said, "Immortal? Monsters? You're Sang-Sang." Along the way to the south, the two chatted with each other. Occasionally, they would reminisce about Min Mountain, the city of Wei, and Chang'an. They did not talk about life and death, nor did they have any last words. Sang-Sang had said all her last words in the Hua Mountain Monastery. Ning-Ke did not plan to live any longer. Even if he had any last words, there was no one to listen to them. Suddenly, a heavy object fell from the dark clouds, whistling through the air and smashing heavily onto the field several hundred feet in front of the black carriage, stirring up a clump of soil. When the carriage arrived, Ning-Ke looked over and saw half a human corpse in a shallow pit in the field. Judging from the skin color and muscle strength, it should be a powerful desolate man warrior. Ning-Ke could not help but be shocked. He was very clear about the physical strength of the desolate man. The stronger the desolate man warrior, the stronger he was to resist knives and swords. However, this powerful desolate man warrior's body had been cut by a sword, and half of his corpse had been shaken to this place. One could imagine how fast the sword was and how powerful the owner of the sword was. It's a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. It seems that there are many powerhouses in the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning-Ke said to Sang-Sang. After a while, the sound of something breaking through the air sounded again in the wilderness. But this time, the sound was not whistling like before, but shrill and much sharper. Ning Ke looked up warily and saw a bright sword flash, flying at high speed along the edge of the dark clouds. It did not stab the carriage, but stabbed diagonally into a slightly raised meadow in front of them on the right. The flying sword was so powerful that it pierced through the entire meadow and came out from the other side of the meadow, bringing with it a trail of black soil and grass. Then it landed on the ground. The bright sword suddenly dimmed, and it looked extremely defeated. This flying sword was so powerful that only a powerhouse who had entered the knowing destiny state could use it. Ning Ke looked at the flying sword behind the meadow and realized that there was a handle behind it. He suddenly realized that the owner of the sword was a powerhouse from the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom, and it was very likely that he was the powerhouse who had cut the desolate man warrior in half. A powerhouse from the Sword Garret of Knowing Destiny state had been defeated just like that. Ning Ke looked up at the battlefield in the south. He looked at the increasingly intense changes in the chi of heaven and earth, and the increasingly powerful sword light and talisman intent. His expression became more and more serious. The black horse carriage was still a long distance away from the battlefield, but he had already seen the two powerhouses leave. Then how many people were dying in the wilderness at every moment? Suddenly, a very thin bright line flashed across Ning Ke's eyes, followed by countless others. He was looking at the battlefield in the south. The light reflected in his black eyes was naturally the scenery there. On the battlefield in the wilderness in the distance, lightning flashed and thunder roared. The lightning was not as powerful as the lightning in the real world, but it was very close to the ground. It flashed and teleported, as if it was chasing after someone. What kind of powerhouse could summon thunder and lightning? Ning Ke thought that if the lightning was chasing after him, he would have no way to deal with it. He could only be struck to death. And there were more than one or two powerhouses in that state in the wilderness. What could he change by bringing Sang Sang there? Would they die peacefully, or would something else really happen as he had expected? Hundreds of thousands of people, as well as countless warhorses and chariots, appearing in one place at the same time would be a very terrifying thing. Neither Chang nor the West Hill Divine Palace could complete a military parade. However, in the vast and boundless wilderness, there was enough space even for a chaotic battle like this, not to mention a parade in formation. The new grass on the wilderness was drenched in blood and trampled by horses. It had to end its life prematurely. The grass roots were still there, but the greenery was gone. The soil on the surface of the wilderness turned into floating ash. The war between the desolate man and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army had lasted for many days. Although they were called natural warriors and had many powerhouses, the desolate man's tribe still could not fight against the entire human world. They were at a disadvantage since the beginning of the war, and they kept losing and retreating. They were only holding on with the spirit and boldness that had been honed in the cold region of the far north for thousands of years. But everyone knew that the desolate man could not hold on for long. The war in the 18th year of the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire and the 3449th year of the Daji era of West Hill were very different from the countless wars in the past. In the past wars, cultivators had always played a supporting role. No matter array tactical masters, talisman masters, or those sword masters who were willing to carry out assassination missions, they could not decide the outcome of a war. But in this war, cultivators were very important. The reason for this was because this was a holy war initiated by the West Hill Divine Palace. Almost all the cultivators from the Central Plains had come to the wilderness. The difference in numbers led to a huge change in the pattern of war. Priests from the West Hill Divine Palace, Haotian Taoism cultivators from various Taoist temples, visiting professors from places like the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom and the Great River Black Ink Garden, rare talisman masters, and array tactical masters relied on by the armies of various countries had all participated in the war. On the battlefield in the wilderness, The chi of heaven and earth was controlled by countless psyche power, disturbed by countless fu papers, and shaken by countless tactical arrays. It was changing rapidly, and even the natural environment was changing drastically. In the wilderness in late spring, heavy rain, heavy snow, morning dew, and evening wind appeared from time to time and then disappeared. The battlefield was chaotic and danger was everywhere. If not for the desolate man's innately strong bodies and the powerful warrior leaders who had secretly learned the skills of the devil's doctrine, they would have collapsed under the first attack of the cultivators and cavalry from the central plains. Although the desolate man had managed to hold on, many of their warriors had died or been seriously injured in these battles. Of course, many more cavalrymen from the central plains had died under their axes, and many cultivators had been killed by the ordinary desolate man soldiers. In short, the battlefield in the wilderness was like a water wheel, constantly drawing water from the stream formed by humans to pour it into the wilderness. The only difference was that the water was human blood and flesh. The invisible water wheel of flesh and blood on the battlefield in the wilderness slowly came to a stop. Both sides temporarily retreated. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army and the cultivators returned to the camp wearily. The warriors of the desolate man's tribe, on the other hand, supported their weary bodies and walked in the wilderness, looking for the corpses of their fellow tribesmen and confirming their names. There was a giant chariot in the center of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. The giant chariot was 3 stories high, and its base was cast from a piece of bronze. The railings on the chariot were pure gold and shone with a holy light under the sunlight, as if it could steal all the light in the world. There was a tower on the chariot, and the curtains were tightly locked. One could not see what was inside the tower, but one could vaguely see an extremely tall figure. The tower on the chariot was the tallest in the entire wilderness. It was even higher than the meadow in the distance, and it even gave people the feeling that the tower on the chariot was higher than the goshawk flying in the sky. The person on the tallest chariot was naturally the tallest. The tall figure on the chariot was the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. The most mysterious person in the cultivation world had always been the Devil's Doctrine suzerain, the 23-year cicada cultivation. But in fact, there was another saying that the most mysterious person was the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. But no one dared to use the word mysterious to describe him. Even the mysterious legends about the hierarch lord had always been filled with a kind of reverence and admiration. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace ruled Hautian Taoism and had the power to depose the emperors of the secular world. He enjoyed the worship of the world's believers with his supreme authority. In terms of power alone, he was even more powerful than the emperor of the Tang Empire. Few people had seen the true face of such a bigwig who stood at the peak of the world. The hierarch lord had never left Peach Mountain until he appeared in the wilderness. "I'm very sleepy. I'll write 2 chapters today and make up for yesterday's 2 chapters tomorrow. Because I promised to write 3 chapters yesterday, I'll write 4 chapters the day after tomorrow on Sunday. I can't take a break, or else I won't be able to catch up. Please continue to support and urge me. I'll cast a monthly vote during the weekend. This is an entertainment activity. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 667. About 10 miles to the east and west of the West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch's chariot, there were 2 other chariots. The one in the east was black and red, full of killing intent. It was the chariot of the great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hong Yu. An elder with deep wrinkles sat in the divine hall to the west. He was the great divine priest of revelation. Just as the black horse carriage drove out of the desolate man's tribe and headed south, the great divine priest of revelation, who had been silent since the start of the battle and had lowered his head to read the scriptures, suddenly raised his head and looked towards the north of the wilderness. He looked at the dark clouds on the horizon and said softly, "It's really dark. A moment later, the tall figure in the giant chariot shook slightly. He looked up at the dark clouds in the north and said in a low voice, "The night is coming soon. Why are you still hesitating?" The hierarch's tone was not very heavy, but his voice was extremely loud. It was like thunder that resounded around the gigantic divine carriage. The faces of the god officials and the experts beside the carriage suddenly paled. When they heard the contents of the hierarch's words and the hidden vigilance, their faces became even paler. On the battlefield in the wilderness, there were very few people who could see the black horse carriage in the distance like the great divine priest of Revelation and the hierarch Lord. However, as the black horse carriage moved, the dark clouds in the north moved south with it. It was extremely eye-catching. It did not take long for everyone to notice the cloud in the sky. Absolute silence fell on the two camps on the battlefield. Then, there was a loud cheer from the desolate man's side. The atmosphere on the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's side became a little depressed. Some people had a look of fear on their faces. Because of this battle, the commander of the West Hill Divine Palace Divine Guards, Luo Kadi, left Yi Hongyu's side and returned to the hierarch Lord. He had been seriously injured by Ning Ke in Chaoyang City. However, it did not take long for his injuries to recover. It was probably because the hierarch Lord had used his divine skills to heal him. Hearing the hierarch Lord's thunderous order, Luo Kadi responded in a low voice. He waved the flag in his hand and gave the order to attack the Divine Hall Coalition army, which stretched for more than 20 miles. The battle that had stopped for less than a moment had started again. Under the command of the general and the blessings of the red-robed priest, the exhausted Divine Hall Coalition army seemed to have gained strength and courage in an instant. They roared and charged towards the desolate man's battlefront. Countless horse hooves trampled on the ground, causing smoke and dust to fly and the earth to shake. The desolate man warriors were also very tired. However, regardless of whether it was the middle-aged man with slightly white hair or the youthful youth, they all stood up and prepared to face the enemy. They did not shout like the Central Plains Coalition army. There was no excitement on their faces either. They calmly and silently held the axes in their hands. The two sides finally met in the wilderness. The axe met the knife, the fist met the horse's head, the sword met the body, the talisman met the flying axe, and the blood met the blood. Countless heavy collisions sounded in the wilderness. Countless horses neighed and fell, and countless knights fell. When the desolate fell, countless sharp weapons slashed at them. Luo Kadi, who was serving beside the giant chariot, glanced at the tall figure in the tower out of the corner of his eye. He knew that the hierarch Lord was very dissatisfied with the coalition army's progress. He gritted his teeth and roared. He led his divine guards and 1,000 powerful papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace towards the north. The 2,000 desolate man warriors who stayed behind the desolate man's tribe had not participated in the previous battles. They had been silently watching the movement in the direction of the giant chariot. Seeing that the West Hill Divine Palace had finally used the legendary papal cavalrymen, the desolate man warriors also began to move, with Tang Chong at the forefront. At this moment, dense hoofbeats sounded from the west of the wilderness. The hoofbeats were very heavy. One could imagine the extraordinary weight of the cavalrymen and the war horses. The hoofbeats were also very uniform. There was not a hint of chaos in the dense hoofbeat. It did not sound like a storm, but more like thousands of people beating drums at the same time. One could imagine the discipline and excellence of these cavalrymen. More than 10,000 Tang elite cavalrymen attacked again. In a very short period of time, the right side of the desolate man's battle line could not withstand the pressure and showed signs of collapse. Tang and the warrior leaders of the desolate man's tribe guessed why the Divine Hall Coalition army suddenly attacked them like crazy again. The black horse carriage was a variable. It might be meaningless, or it might directly change the situation on the battlefield. Therefore, they did not hesitate to face it and did not retreat. They were confident that they could withstand the attack of the Divine Hall Coalition army until the Black Horse carriage arrived. Although many people would definitely die, they felt danger when they saw more than 10,000 Tang cavalrymen begin to charge. However, the battlefield in the wilderness was in chaos. Tang and the most powerful warriors of the tribe could not support their people on the right side. Even if they rushed over, they could not defeat the 10,000 Tang cavalrymen who had already begun to charge. Therefore, they silently and valiantly continued to fight their way into the central region, hoping to dampen the morale of the Divine Hall Coalition army. It would be best if they could annihilate the legendary papal cavalrymen. If they could do this, they might even win a turning point in this battle that was bound to be lost. At least, they could delay the tragic moment of the desolate man being exterminated. In the center of the Divine Hall Coalition army was the army of the South Jin Kingdom. The South Jin Kingdom had always been regarded as the second most powerful country in the world. The South Jin Kingdom cavalry also boasted that they were the second most powerful army in the world. It was not until they came to the wilderness and began to fight with the desolate man that they realized how shameful their boasting was. At this time, they were facing the strong attack of more than 2,000 desolate man soldiers. The formation was suddenly in chaos, and a few cultivators were even trampled to death. Cheng Zicheng, a powerhouse from the sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom, wore an ordinary South Jin cavalry uniform. He rode on horseback and waved the sword in his hand to kill left and right. However, his eyes were fixed on a powerful leader of the desolate man dozens of feet away. The powerful leader of the desolate man was very powerful. 3 disciples of the sword garret had already been killed by him. At least 10 cavalrymen from the South Jin Kingdom had been knocked down by something that looked like an iron rod. At this time, the situation of the cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom was very bad. If the leader of the desolate man was allowed to rush over, it would definitely cause panic. Once the center of the desolate man was broken, the desolate man would be able to face the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. Looking at the momentum of the desolate man, the other party's goal was to eat the 1,000 papal cavalrymen alive. Cheng Zicheng's face suddenly turned pale. An extremely calm sword style seeped out from the ordinary military uniform he was wearing. The sword left his hand and turned into a long rainbow, piercing towards the leader of the desolate man. With a sharp sound, the flying sword, which contained his lifetime's cultivation, cut through the abdomen of the leader of the desolate man. Blood sprayed like rain, but the momentum of the sword was not over. The hilt carried the lower half of the leader of the desolate man's corpse and flew diagonally towards the back of the wilderness. A few desolate men looked sorrowful and flew towards Cheng Zicheng. Cheng Zicheng's expression did not change. Using his finger as a sword, he easily knocked down the desolate men. As a powerhouse from the sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom, his cultivation state was only below that of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai. He was a grand cultivator in the middle of the knowing destiny state. Ordinary desolate men were no match for him. In the previous battle, he had kept a low profile and endured, just to complete this shocking attack. Now that he had achieved his goal, he naturally would not continue fighting. No matter how strong a cultivator was, his body was still fragile. In this battlefield filled with flying axes and arrows and the vibrations of the chi of heaven and earth, he could die at any time due to unknown reasons. Moreover, he urgently needed to meditate and recuperate after using the strongest sword of his life. Cheng Zicheng raised his hand to the sky and wanted to take back his flying sword. However, at this moment, he heard the sound of feet hitting the ground from afar. His expression suddenly changed. The soles of the feet hit the ground like drums. The person was fast, but the fist was even faster. A terrifying and scorching fist style hit Cheng Zicheng's face from dozens of feet away. At this moment, Cheng Zicheng's psyche power was exhausted and his body was exhausted. His natal sword had flown for miles, and he had no way to defend against this terrifying fist style. He could only wait for death. With a crisp crack, a bolt of thunder exploded in front of him. The fist style collided with the thunder, and an extremely strong wave of the chi of heaven and earth erupted. Qing Ziqing's warhorse was directly shaken to death. His body was also shaken to the side and flew backward, falling heavily to the ground. With a puff, Qing Ziqing's face turned pale, and he could not stop vomiting blood. With the help of the thunder, he had luckily avoided the terrifying fist style. However, he was still seriously injured by the chi of heaven and earth when the two collided. The most serious thing was that he had lost contact with his own natal sword. This powerhouse from the sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom had his natal sword destroyed by Ning Kei's arrow in the Lank Temple the year before last. With the help of his senior brother, Liu Bai, he had managed to refine a second natal sword, which was more powerful than before. Now that it was destroyed again, the damage to him was even more terrifying. After the first thunder, there was a second. The sound of thunder kept ringing in the wilderness, and the extremely thin lightning illuminated the smoke and dust. The lightning did not come from high up in the sky, but from a space about 100 feet above the ground of the wilderness. It suddenly appeared and then suddenly fell. The power of these lightning was not as terrifying as the real lightning in the natural world. However, if it fell on a human body, it would still cause terrifying damage. Even the strongest desolate man-warrior would be turned into ashes under one blow. However, the strange thing was that the lightning that was born in the void did not strike the desolate man-warriors everywhere on the battlefield. Instead, it disappeared and appeared from time to time, as if it was chasing after someone, like a sword with a spirit. There was a kind of goshawk that built its nest on the ground in the wilderness. One goshawk's nest had long been trampled into ruins by countless horse hooves. The goshawk fluttered in the air in fear. It was reluctant to leave, but there was nothing it could do. When the lightning sounded, it finally could not bear the instinctive fear. It could no longer care about the young goshawk in its nest. It cried out and flew higher into the sky. The goshawk did not dare to fly north because there was a dark cloud in the north. It could only fly up and south. The higher it flew, the smaller the people on the ground of the wilderness became. Gradually, they became densely packed ants. If the sky had eyes, the humans who were risking their lives and killing in the wilderness would probably be a black dot smaller than an ant. It might be confused or laugh at what it saw. I'm still so sleepy. I'm going out now. There will be updates at night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.